And we're live with Be Green with Amy.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Be Green with Amy. I'm Amy. After adopting a whole food plant-based lifestyle, my hubby Rick and I lost over 130 pounds. Now I coach others on their plant-based journey. Just Task Voice. Let's welcome our guest.
Dr. Peter Rogers is a Stanford and Harvard-educated MD who for over 30 years has helped people optimize performance for school, sports, and health. He is an imaging-guided surgeon and neuroradiologist who's written nutrition, medical, and study skill books. Please click like to help Be Green with Amy. Welcome, Dr. Peter Rogers.
Greetings, Green Warrior. Welcome to our broadcast today. I am so glad that you're here. Today, as you saw with the introduction, we are going to be having Dr. Peter Rogers come on the broadcast. And I wanted to ask you, Green Warriors, if any of you have already adopted a whole food plant-based lifestyle, or if you're considering adopting one, or if you're just here because you're curious. And now I'm going to bring on Dr. Rogers. Greetings and welcome, Dr. Rogers.
Hi.
Hi. I was just asking our Green Warriors if they were interested in adopting a whole food plant-based lifestyle, or if perhaps they were just interested, or maybe they're just kind of curious or didn't even know about it. But today you are here to talk about a really interesting topic. And Green Warrior, are you curious about how to optimize the aging process? Because Dr. Rogers is going to illuminate common ailments associated with aging, exploring their potential causes, and providing valuable insights into prevention management and even strategies for reversal. So we're going to learn a lot about this. And I feel that since I have adopted the whole food plant-based lifestyle, I feel that I kind of feel like younger than I did back in 2012. I know that I weigh less. I know that I feel I have more muscle mass, and just not having a lot of the ailments that I had prior to adopting the lifestyle, I do kind of feel like I turned back time. So Dr. Rogers is going to talk to us about that, right, Dr. Rogers?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about that. And if you guys have a question for Dr. Rogers, Green Warrior, just go ahead and type that in the chat, and I'm going to bring that up in the broadcast a little bit later to ask him. And I'm going to welcome Thanks. Greetings, Thanks. Thanks says, yes, I am plant-based SOS-free. And for those of you that are not familiar with that, SOS-free is sugar, oil, and salt-free. And that's what I follow, that lifestyle. And so does Dr. Rogers. And he's going to tell us more about that as well. He'll be having a presentation soon. If you have questions during the presentation, go ahead and type them in the chat, and we are going to ask those later on in the broadcast. Meanwhile, I'm going to play a quick game of true or false, and then we'll start the presentation.
It's time for True or False on Be Green with Amy Live. Answer true or false to Amy's questions in the comments below, and Amy will ask our guest for the expert answer.
Okay, Green Warrior, what do you think? True or false? Men in Western society typically start developing atherosclerosis in their 30s? Okay, type in your guess. And Dr. Rogers, tell us about that.
Yes. Usually they don't start getting atherosclerosis until they sort of wore out the Windkessel effect in their ascending thoracic aorta. What that means is you got a lot of elastic fibers in your ascending thoracic aorta. And when your heart pumps blood, they stretch outward. And that's cardiac systole, contraction in Greek. During diastole, cardiac relaxation, the ascending thoracic aorta has elastic recoil inward, which then propels the blood during the relaxation phase of the cardiac cycle. So what's my point? My point is somebody who chronically eats high-fat diets, high-sodium diets, that means they're going to be chronically hypertensive. So chronic high blood pressure is going to cause overstretching of the ascending thoracic aorta, and then they're going to lose their diastolic flow. It's not going to be as good. That's going to lead to higher systolic flow, and the higher pressures, progressively higher, start damaging the arteries all over their body, and that's the main number one cause of atherosclerosis. And then it gets worse. You superimpose on that chronically all the high fat, high sodium, and you make it even worse if you smoke cigarettes or something. But yeah, basically, this process really starts ramping up in the 30s. I've had a lot of doctors even asking me for Viagra in their 30s. You're talking to me about Viagra in their 30s. 30% of men become impotent in their 30s, 40 in their 40s, 50% in their 50s. So impotence is much more common than people widely recognize. And, that's usually happens a little bit before the coronary arteries. Typically, the pudendal arteries to the Johnson are about 1.5 millimeters. Coronaries about 3 millimeters. Carotids in the neck are about 6 millimeters. So basically, these arteries start plugging up.
Yeah, that's what they say is the canary in the coal mine, right? Yeah.
Yep, it's a good expression for it.
Yeah, and a lot of people aren't aware of this. These are staggering statistics, and that is definitely something that I think it's being normalized, though, as far as the erectile dysfunction because of all these pills that are available, and that's just seems like what it's going to be with medical science and intervention taken ill.
Yeah.
Right.
I would comment on that is that, that's a big mistake. A lot of guys think it's no big deal. I'll just take a Viagra. I'm like, no, you don't understand. They're becoming impotent while they're probably just stenotic, so the artery's narrowed. But if they reverse their diet, they might, open it up more and keep it open for decades. Whereas they go on the Viagra, but they keep eating the lousy diet, they're going to be more likely to progress to full occlusion and have it become irreversible, their impotence.
Yeah. So it's just kind of like a little Band-Aid, and it's not really going to solve the problem. And I wonder how many physicians are actually making that connection and telling their patients, this is a sign, that you're in your 30s or 40s or 50s. This is a sign for you to take action. Okay, so our next true or false. True or false: stress and cortisol can suppress the immune system, negatively impacting its ability to prevent infections and cancer. Wow, that's an interesting connection. What do you think, Green Warriors? Dr. Rogers?
Yeah, basically the body has limited resources. There's only a certain amount of glucose floating around in your blood to enable you to do the things you do while you're typically in a routine day. But when there's a sudden, immediate danger, like think of our ancestors, being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, you have to all of a sudden ramp things up, climb a tree, fight, do something, okay, to try to survive. All that matters is you survive the next 20 minutes. It doesn't matter if you heal the scratch on your foot. It doesn't matter if you if you remove the cancer cells in your body. All that matters is survive next 20 minutes. So the immune system, with the acute stress system, when it ramps up, it throws glucose and also a little bit of blood lipids into your blood. Your blood becomes more prothrombotic, prone to clot. All of this, in case you get scratched by a tiger so you don't bleed out. So what I'm trying to say is it switches off your immune system, and it's made in our ancestors for a quick, 20 minutes, 30 minutes of physical stress. It's not made for the modern world where people are psychologically stressed out day after day. Then they don't sleep. They got insomnia because they're stressed out. And then because they're stressed out the next day and tired, they're drinking caffeine at work, coffee or whatever. Sleep deprivation and caffeine do the same thing as psychological stress. They increase cortisol and the catecholamines, adrenaline, noradrenaline. So you're shutting off your immune system a prolonged amount of time. Well, guess what? That's highly atherogenic, number one. Number two, it turns off your immune system, making you more vulnerable to infections and to cancer. It's not good. You don't want that.
Yeah, and these are, again, some connections that not everybody is making, and you're bringing them to light today, and I really appreciate that. We're going to learn a lot, and we're going to dive deeper into that in a little bit when Dr. Rogers begins his presentation. Okay, here's our last true or false question. True or false: vegans generally have higher white blood cell counts compared to those on a standard American diet due to less systematic inflammation. What do you think, Green Warriors? Dr. Rogers?
Yeah, the blood labs for meat eaters are worse in every way. Normal white blood cell counts defined as like 4.5 to 11, but they actually think it should be redefined. For vegans, it should be only 3 to 9. They have lower white blood cell counts. They have lower blood lipids. They tend to maintain their kidney function longer into life. They got lower liver function test results. Everything's better in vegans. They've got much less diabetes. They got much better body weights, body mass indices in general. So what I'm basically saying is it's the smart way to go. Look, I've studied everything. I'm doing this because it's the best way to go. I don't get any money for it. I just want to be healthy. I want to keep everything working. I know what happens to the regular people. It's not good. They get pill after pill after pill. The pills don't work. Surgery after surgery, premature death, and a lot of suffering and torture. I don't want that. So I'm a low-fat vegan, 60 years old. I don't take any pills. I don't have any medical problems. That's what you want. Okay, I had a little mild eye infection. I get one of those, every couple of years. I got powder from surgical gloves in my eye one time, and I get a little bit of a problem with my eye glands, but it's a minor thing. But what I'm trying to say is that's not a chronic medical problem. That's like an intermittent rare thing. It's nothing.
Yeah. Well, these are good things to know. And I've heard, especially with a lot of my clients who are concerned because after adopting this lifestyle, many of them will go for their annual exams and get their blood work done, and their white blood cell count is down. And I've even had some clients who have said that their doctors were concerned that maybe they had cancer because of this change in their white blood cell count. So this is something that anybody who's on this plant-based lifestyle should be aware that this could potentially be something that is not what their doctor may be knowledgeable about.
Yeah, the conventional medical doctors always expect the patient to get sicker and sicker. They never cure anybody. So that would be out. If a patient suddenly gets better, they're like, is something wrong? It's just, think about it. They have no cure for diabetes, hypertension, coronary arteries. They just say, keep on taking more pills.
Yeah.
A cure is you go vegan and you don't need to take a pill anymore. That's a cure.
Exactly. And we're going to find out more about that today with your presentation. And Dr. Rogers, if you want to go ahead and bring that up. Okay. And while we're doing that today, we're going to be talking about age-defying secrets and how to look younger and feel better than your spouse. So get a little competition going. Sometimes people who have adopted this lifestyle may not have their spouse on board. So we're going to give you a little ammunition here to show them what you're learning about this. And so if you want to go into the present mode.
Okay, so I got to go click on present, and I'll click on share screen.
And then while you're doing that, Green Warriors, tell us where are you watching from? Tell us in the comments. I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And tell me if in the comments also, if you've had, okay, I think we have, I'm going to ask you
see it
later. Yes, I do. Okay, let's see. Here we go. Okay, let's get started.
Okay. So this is about how to age better than your spouse. And I'll first show this couple right here. Her name is Annette Larkins. She's 70 years old in this picture, and she looks fantastic. She was described as the most beautiful 70-year-old grandmother in the world. Here is her husband, and he owns some type of meat store. I'm not sure if it's a delicatessen or a butcher shop or something, but she had gone into that store. They've owned it for many decades, and she was disgusted by it. So she decided to become a vegan. They live in Florida, which is an advantage because she's got a very nice garden in her backyard where she grows plants. She's been on a bunch of TV news channels and stuff. She became pretty famous. So anyway, she's 70 years old. She looks hot, okay? How many 70-year-old women look hot, okay? And her husband looks like the typical American, the big belly. This has been talked about on all the news shows, big belly, hypertension, and all the stuff that goes with that. Okay, so this is just one typical example of what the vegan diet could do. And then here's another little poem about this sort of thing. Jack Sprat could eat no fat. His wife could eat no lean. Between them both, they licked the platter clean. Okay, so a lot of couples have found themselves in that situation. Now, when you talk about male-female relationships, it's been said that in the battle of the sexes, the woman fights from a battleship, whereas the man fights from a rowboat. In marriage, a woman has some big advantages on the hubby. Hubby almost always wants to make the two-back beast more than she does. In addition, if there's a divorce, she usually comes out of it better than he does. That's why most divorces are filed by the woman. Okay. Now, it has also been said, Herbert Spencer said, at the wedding ceremony, the woman gets a ring on her finger. The man gets one in his nose. And like J.R.R. Tolkien, one ring to rule them all. A woman gets power over her husband. It's like my sweet little fiance. All of a sudden, she got the wedding ring. She's like my boss now. I'm like, what happened? Samuel Taylor Coleridge said, the most happy marriage would be a deaf man to a blind woman. Okay, so, I was trying to understand psychology better, maybe, understand my wife better, life, who knows what. So I'm reading through all this psychology books, and I come across B.F. Skinner in the Skinner box. And the Skinner box was a thing from his study of behaviorism. He puts a dumb animal in there like a mouse, and he pushes one lever to get a reward. If he does something the trainer doesn't want, he gets a shock. And I'm reading this, and I'm thinking to myself, man, is this stupid? What a waste of my time. Why am I even reading this, wasting my time? This has nothing to do with my life. And then I had a eureka moment. I'm like, oh, crap. The family home is a Skinner box. My wife is a trainer and I'm the dumb animal. Do as I say. Nagging sex, nagging sex. You got 3 minutes. That's it. Now give me all your money. I'm like, oh my goodness, how did I get myself into this? Okay, now we're going to talk about how to argue with a wife. First of all, like I said, the wife's in an advantageous position in marriage, but what you have to use is a little bit of deception. So you have to act like you really want one thing, but in actuality, you really want something else. Oh, and like, for example, I'll just tell you, like, look at all the floors in the house. So I had the big negotiation with the wife about who's going to get the bathroom next to the parents' bedroom and who's going to get the clothes closet next to the parents' bedroom. And I knew I was probably going to lose, and I acted, all disappointed about it. But what I really wanted was to have to go all the way upstairs for the clothes and even have to put a bunch of stuff in the basement. Why? Because all day long I'm going up and down stairs. Who do you think's in better physical shape? It's not even close, I can assure you. Okay, a couple more quotes about marriage. Camille Paglia. Teenage boys have only a brief season of exhilarating liberty between the control by their mothers and the control by their wives. Yes. And somebody should coach us. I didn't even know these things were happening. They all sort of just happened without me realizing. I'm like, oh, that's how it works, after I'd already screwed up. Okay. Jules Renard, the Frenchman, he says, love is like an hourglass, and when the heart fills, the mind empties. We've all seen that one. Samuel Butler says, brigands demand your money or your life, but a wife wants both. Okay, Jaja Gabor has some interesting comments about marriage and male-female relationships. She said, I'm a good housekeeper. Every time I divorce a man, I keep his house. A man is incomplete until he's married. Then he's finished. You never really know a man until you've divorced him. I love intellectual men. They know everything and suspect nothing. Rodney Dangerfield, what's the difference between an arranged marriage versus marrying for love? You can spend the rest of your life blaming your parents instead of yourself. Ben Franklin said, before marriage, a young man should have his eyes wide open. After marriage, it's probably best if he keeps them half shut. Okay, one of my professors in one of my residency, he said, if you put a jelly bean into a jar for every time you had sex while you were dating and then took one out during the next 3 years of marriage, he says, by the time, he said, you would never empty that jar. So hopefully, that's not always the case. But anyways, that's a little bit thoughts on that. Now, what do we really want? We all hope we have something like this Fountain of Youth here, painted by Lucas Cranach. You come in on one side, kind of elderly, frail, out of shape, debilitated. You exit on the other side, youthful, full of vigor, and ready to go. We're never going to be 18 years old again, but we can potentially come closer to it with the low-fat vegan diet. Just to give you a sense of how things play out, here's a normal distribution. And here's like the typical Americans. I call them, the ignorant, sad diet eaters. They're pathetic. I feel sorry for these patients. And I've noticed it. My internal medicine friends have noticed it. Almost every single patient by 60 is cognitively slow. Very often by 55, they start becoming, just a real slow lag time to respond. And, they still can drive their way to work or something if they're still working. A lot of them can't work anymore. They're sort of beaten down. The carpenter type guys, a lot of times they got messed up wrists, all kinds of poor health and poor injuries and arthritis. The healthcare providers tend to be a little bit better, maybe 10 years ahead of them. They typically eat some version of a lacto-ovo pesco vegetarian diet versus the health aristocrats are like the low-fat vegans. That's the persons who have the least problems. Like I said, I'm 60. I got no medical problems. I don't take any pills. I don't expect to ever need a surgery or take a pill. Okay. And in a sense, what we're all doing is we're playing chess with death. All right. This is from the Ingmar Bergman movie, Seventh Seal, the knight playing chess with death. And so what you want to do is learn how to play the game as well as possible. And in a sense, it's like a video game. Here's Super Mario Brothers. Basically, the character runs through an obstacle course and they screw up, they do the wrong thing, they lose energy points. If they do good stuff, they get more energy points. So, and Socrates had said this a long time ago, if we want to be excellent, we must learn what is good for us and what is bad for us, okay? Study excellence. Aristotle said the same thing. So basically, these are things that are bad for you. High-fat diets, MJ, tobacco, alcohol, unfiltered water, all of these things, processed food. Here's the things that are good for you. Get your sleep, get your exercise, positive conversation, positive music, friends, religious people are a lot healthier. And I'll go through some more of these things, but it's basically all that. Okay, so what can you expect? If you do everything right, you can probably live about a little bit over 90 years, okay, on average. The Seventh-day Adventists, the healthiest, longest lived people that's ever well documented, the women were living about 89.6 years, the men about 4 years less than that. Dr. McDougall had worked with that population, and he said a lot of those vegans weren't the healthiest vegans in the world. They were sort of religious vegans more so than health vegans. So the feeling was that they could be significantly healthier. So that's a little bit of an estimation. It was 89.6. I'm putting it at about 92 is probably about the average based on what we know today. Maybe a little higher than that. I actually think it's probably a little higher than that. If you go Mediterranean diet, you're probably going to, on average, cash your chips in around the mid 70s. SAD diet eaters about mid 60s on average, maybe a little less than that. But here's one point too is when you're up above this line right here, I call this the health span line. That means you're physically fit and you could do what you want to do. Versus a lot of the SAD diets, they're all messed up by the time they're in their late 40s or their 50s. Going for open heart surgery. I see lots of these guys going for open heart surgery in their early 50s. Okay, that's a disaster. You just eat the low-fat vegan diet, you'll never need open heart surgery for coronary artery disease. And like I said, the doctors, this healthcare provider group, they tend to be about 10 years better off, but they still get the same stuff typically. I got lots of fat doctor friends, and they're quite often not much better off than the patients because they never learn nutrition. Another question is, well, what is the optimal health, the holy grail of health? And I like this scene from the movie Amadeus. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, Amadeus. And Mozart here is talking to the emperor about his new opera, The Marriage of Figaro. And he's asking him, how long do you think I can sustain this polyphony whereby there's more than one voice? First the husband sings, then the wife sings, then the maid comes in, then the butler, and so on. And he says, 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Okay, so the point is, what's optimal health? Is it just like sort of the typical medicine view of life is if you keep the coronaries open, everything is good, okay? But I think that's an underestimation to just say clean coronaries is the ultimate in health because, a person also will benefit from having some physical strength. I get that from some exercise, some endurance, again, aerobic exercise there, sort of a look of vitality, beauty, if you will, because if you eat high-fat diet, you get better perfusion of your skin. So your skin looks good. You get some sunshine, your skin looks better, okay? You don't want to get an advanced sunburn, of course not, but I personally think this whole dermatologist, more sunscreen is nonsense, okay? Our ancestors got sunshine and they got their vitamin D that way, and we all know when a person's got a little suntan, they look good, okay? Few things more attractive than a woman's tan lines, okay? It's just a fact. All right, optimal, look at all these Olympic athletes. Why are they so good looking? Because they're so healthy. Optimal cognitive performance. You want your brain working well. And this is one of my key points is that the brain is more demanding and fussy. There's a lot of things that are toxic to the brain that don't really affect the heart too much. So if you want to optimize your cognitive performance and health as you age, you want to try to learn a little bit about these things that are harmful to the brain. Okay, so you got to go beyond that old internal medicine saying of it's good for the heart, it's good for the brain. Yeah, fine, that's true, but we want more. Okay, optimal longevity, that you have a good long life and you're sort of healthy as long as possible before the end. How can we get all of above? We tend to get it in the same way. So what I've been talking about already, I'm going to talk a little bit about the immune system here today. The immune system is based on cells interacting with each other. And when the cells interact with each other, they have to read each other. Okay, like humans, the way we interact is with our eyes. Okay, we see another person walk into a room, we say, hi, how you doing? Okay, now a dog might sniff each other, okay, sniff each other's butts or faces or whatever, but you know what? We don't do that. That's why I think deodorant is stupid, okay? A lot of people do it out of conformist ignorance. And what I'm saying is that significantly increases your risk of breast cancer. So why would you do it? Potentially even of dementia if it's an inhaled type thing. I never in my life, I had 1 million conversations with guys about women. 1 million, 2 million, okay? Never once has a guy said, well, because of her body odor, I'm not attracted to her. It doesn't happen, okay? Don't worry about that one. Okay, how does the immune system work? First of all, there's a physical barrier. Externally, that's your skin, your intestinal lining, your respiratory lining in your lungs. Okay, there's always a physical barrier to keep out bacteria from the outside world. Then right beneath it is a guard. The guard is called a sentinel cell. And the sentinel cell, the guard, is something like a macrophage. Macrophage means big eater, macrophage eater. And it's kind of like a Pac-Man cell. It'll eat the bacteria. And there's actually a specific subtype of these macrophages called dendritic cells. I'll show you one of those later, but they look like a starfish. They're the sort of most powerful macrophage cell. Okay, anyways, there's the guard. So if some bacteria breach the physical barrier, the macrophage eats them. And when it eats them, it goes, oh shit, there's too many of them. I can't fight them by myself. And then they run to the lymph node. And then they run to the lymph node and they start searching for help. Wake up, you guys, wake up. Help me, please. There's a bacterial invasion. Help me, please. Now, the lymphocytes are a bunch of stuck up like officers, okay? The macrophage is like a private, okay? And so they're a bunch of officers, and they're like, that's not my job. I'm in the Air Force. I'm in the Navy. I don't do this crap. Get the hell out of here. You're waking me up, okay? So the macrophage is desperate. Please help me. Please help me. I'll show you how that works in a moment here. So here is the bacteria coming in, and the bacteria binds with a receptor on the dendritic cell. It looks like a starfish right here. And it's got PRRs for pattern recognition receptors. So this is also part of what's called innate immunity. Basically, it works for everything, but it's kind of a simple, the initial system is very simple, but it works for everything. And what it recognizes on the bacteria is something called PAMPs or MAMPs. So PAMPs means pathogen-associated molecular pattern. MAMPs means, like microbial associated molecular pattern, meaning that there's certain molecules that only happen on bacteria. They never happen on a human cell. So when its receptor contacts one of them, it goes, this is definitely bad. This is a problem. LPS is sort of the prototype problem on gram-negative bacteria, endotoxin, LTA, lipoteichoic acid. LPS is lipopolysaccharides. LTA, lipoteichoic acid, is the prototype for gram-positive bacteria. So the dendritic cell binds to this and he goes, oh shit, here's trouble, eats them. And as soon as he eats them, he goes, I got to get help. Because usually there's a whole bunch of bacteria at once. There's also something called DAMPs, which means damage-associated molecular patterns. And that means like when you have an injury, let's say you have a physical injury, you're playing sports and you get a big bruise or something, there'll be some tissue damaged by that trauma, and the immune system will recognize that too. And that's a damage-associated molecular pattern. There's also such thing as CAMPs, cancer-associated molecular patterns. It goes, uh-oh, cancer cells will express some molecules different than regular cells. So that's an indicator for the immune system to get busy and remove them. So the dendritic cell then runs to the lymph node. Inside the lymph node, like I said, it's going to search around to find which cells will match, can bind that antigen. Because once it eats the antigen, it'll express it on its cell surface. I'll show a better picture in a moment. So it's got to find help that is appropriate and willing to help. One quick point, too, about cancer is that usually we can't diagnose cancer until it's about the size of your thumbnail, about 1 centimeter in diameter. And by then, it's got millions of cells, and it's often shedding a lot of cells into the blood. And what do you think removes those cells? Your immune system. Okay, so the point I'm saying is you want your immune system to work well, to not only protect you from infections, but to protect you from cancer. That's an important thing to know. And it's going to turn out that the healthier your immune system is, the longer you live typically. And you basically can think a little bit, too, of how cells work as old-fashioned bacteria, before oxygen was on the planet, would typically burn glucose anaerobically, burn it to pyruvate, extrude lactate, an acid, lactic acid buildup. You've heard of that when you exert yourself so intensely physically that you run out of oxygen. A normal human cell burns a lot of oxygen because it has to make a lot of energy. Energy in a cell is called ATP. That means adenosine triphosphate, ATP. And you can make tons of that in your mitochondria with oxygen. A cancer cell is typically a cell that's had an injured mitochondria, a damaged mitochondria. That's the Warburg effect. And when that happens, the cancer cell is almost like Johnny Paycheck, where he says, take this job and screw it. So a normal cell, let's say in the liver, has got a lot of things to do. It's got to detoxify chemicals, maintain blood glucose level, process the incoming food stuff. It's busy, make the bile. So it's working all day, versus the cancer cells like, screw it. I don't have enough energy to do all this work. I'm not working anymore. Screw it. I quit. Goodbye, see ya. I'm going to go find an apartment somewhere else. So all it wants to do is make copies of itself. And so its behavior totally changes. One of the things a cancer cell will do is it'll extrude acid into its surrounding space. H+ is a proton. That's an indicator of acid. Is that the cancer cell becomes in competition with the surrounding cells. And the more acid it pumps out, the more acidic that environment, it's called the tumor microenvironment or the tumor milieu, the bigger advantage the cancer has over the surrounding cells. That's why the plant-based diet is alkaline compared to, let's say, an animal food diet, and that helps to prevent cancer growth, okay? There's more to it, of course, than that, but that's useful to know. Oops. So here we go. All right, a little bit more about how cancer works. Let's say you have an infection in the lung. The dendritic cell will travel to the lymph node, try to find a lymphocyte. Those are the cells in lymph nodes. that will help it to fight the infection or the cancer, and then it'll circulate through the blood and go back to the spot of the infection or the tumor and help to, fight that infection or cancer. One of the things that happens is once they find a lymphocyte that's a match, that one will have clonal expansion, meaning you'll make a whole bunch of copies of it real fast. So you got more guys to help fight the infection or cancer. Okay, here's just a little bit about cancer. Imagine cancer is almost like having a base camp. You got the cancer stem cells here, and those are really the major troublemakers, because a lot of times patients get chemotherapy, and the chemotherapy will shrink down the tumor, and everybody's all happy. You get the post-chemo CAT scan, and on the post-chemo CAT scan, the tumor shrunk a lot, and they're like, yeah, we had a positive beneficial result. Okay, but the catch is, a lot of times it doesn't finish off the stem cells. And so, about a year later, 2 years later, that cancer is still growing. It comes right back, and it often, makes the patient die. All right, so that's a potential problem. So you need to be aware of that. Also, like I said, it's going to be secreting acid into the periphery. That acid, those protons, they turn off the immune system. In the high acidic environment, the immune system cells can't function. And it also helps the cancer to outcompete the surrounding cells. Some hypoxia as well favors the cancer over the surrounding cells. So cancer milieu is hypoxic and acidotic. So again, look at this article here on cancer biochemistry. It says low pH in the tumor microenvironment works as a global protection shield for cancer cells. Yeah, it just trashes the immune system, makes it, in a sense, accept the cancer when it shouldn't. Okay, a little more detail about the immune system. The lining cells are what is called epithelial cells. The lining of just about anything is called an epithelium. You can have specific names for those, like in the gut, they'll be called enterocytes, because the other name for the gut is enteric tract. There's these strong junctions between the epithelial cells called TJs, tight junctions, and that's very important because these TJs will block bacteria or bacterial toxins from getting through. Beneath the epithelial cells, there's a basement membrane that stabilizes them in place, keeps them from moving, and it connects them to the deeper connective tissue. We call it ECM, extracellular matrix, outside the cells. And then that is attached to all these cells to keep everything in its place where it belongs. Because the body's always moving. It moves when you walk, it moves when you breathe, when your heart beats. So you need these connective tissues. They're kind of like the scaffold of the body, if you will, largely collagen. Collagen is the scaffold protein. It's 1/3 of the proteins in the entire body to keep everything in place. Okay, so this is the first level of immune system for fighting problems, is to have a wall. Was it Robert Frost said, good fences make good neighbors, something like that. You need a good fence to prevent problems. Okay, now here I just thought this was a little funny. Everybody remember this story when you were a kid? Are You My Mother? So a little birdie, mommy flew out of the nest for some reason, and the bird got out of the nest and was trying to find its mother, and it went around and it started asking everybody. It asked the dog, are you my mother? It asked the cat, the kitten, are you my mother? Asked the rooster, are you my mother? And what I'm getting at, that's what's happening with that lymph node when it enters that dendritic cell. It presents the antigens from the bacteria it just ate. It takes little pieces of them and it puts it on its outer surface, and it's trying to find a lymphocyte that will bind to them, that'll be a match, because it needs that help to fight back at its spot where it arose from. Because what's happening in that spot where there's a breach in the epithelium is tons and tons of bacteria are flooding in, and the few little guard cells cannot fight them off. So they got to go, I need you guys, go, let's go. So this is what it's all about. So that's a kind of a key thing. Oh, actually, then here I was going to say, well, what helps your immune system to work better? This is a useful slide. You want to pay attention. You might want to hit the print screen button on this one. You want to stay warm. Okay, why do you want to stay warm based on what I told you? I'll explain it, but basically your heart is connected to your arteries. It pumps blood into your arteries. It travels around the body, goes through the capillaries to the veins, and then it comes back to the heart. So you have a closed circuit with a heart pump. The lymphatics run parallel to all of your blood vessels, but they don't have a pump. What's the pump for the lymphatics? That you move your muscles. I've seen a lot of people who survive metastatic cancer, and a lot of them exercise a lot. And the reason is you get all your lymphatics going, you pump your white blood cells throughout your body so they can fight and find and remove the cancer cells. So exercise is big. Number two, being warm. What do you get when you have a bad infection? You get a fever. Why do you get a fever? Because it accelerates the ability of the immune system to fight the infection. So what I'm basically saying is I like to stay warm. I like to stay warm. And I know from experience, I got a lot of experience pushing myself in both physical activity and mental activity. and I like being warm. And it sometimes becomes a conflict between my family. I got a lot of fat meat eaters, okay? So it's sort of like, they're like, it's too hot in here. It's too hot. Are you crazy? And I'm like, you fat dinosaur retard. I need more warmth in here, okay? I'm freezing. I'm shivering in my office, okay? It's kind of a joke in the family, but there's always a big fuss over who's controlling the thermostat. Anyways, so you want to stay warm. I often will wear under t-shirts, sweatshirts, and then I'll wear, jacket and stuff because I want to be warm. And I know from experience, I can just be way more productive if I feel good and I feel warm. What's next? You want to eat a low-fat diet because you just get much better blood flow. There's other problems with fat. Fat causes activation in neutrophils. You eat, a meal of animal fat, it's going to activate your neutrophils. They're going to release something called MPO, myeloperoxidase. That's going to collapse down your endothelial glycocalyx. It damages your blood vessels, okay? And sodium does something very similar. Sodium's even worse. Sodium causes platelet activation, the little clotting cells in your blood, and those activated platelets will cover the metastatic cancer cells in your blood. And when they cover the metastatic cancer cell, they hide it from the immune system. So the high sodium diets will increase the risk of metastatic cancer. Same thing with being psychologically stressed on a chronic basis. The psychological stress leads to activation of the platelets. Remember, you're being chased by a tiger in the dark, so you want your blood to be slightly prothrombotic during an acute stress event. But the modern person is often chronically stressed out, and so they're chronically having prothrombotic. That means increased tendency to clot. Thrombus is clot blood. And so they're more at risk to have metastatic cancer spread. So like if you got cancer, one of the things you would want to do, and just anybody to be healthy, is you want to spend less time stressed out. I'll go into more detail about how that all works. Another thing is you need good mitochondrial function to have a high functioning immune system. And also, what causes cancer? The main thing is the metabolic theory of cancer, the Otto Warburg theory, that mitochondrial injury is what tends to lead to cancer. Okay, so you want to avoid mitochondrial inhibitors. You want to avoid high-fat diets because they cause hypoxia, high-sodium diets because they tend to cause hypoxia as well, and not be excessively stressed all the time. These are all things that reduce your risk of cancer and of metastatic cancer and improve your prognostic survival. The other thing is having a psychological sense of purpose. If you feel that your life has a purpose, you're more resilient. And this has been noticed by a bunch of people. Fyodor Dostoevsky, the author of Brothers Karamazov, one of the greatest novels ever written, he said he had noticed when he was in the concentration camps, the men who had a purpose, they survived a lot better. The ones who had a happy childhood, they had these positive memories and it gave them hope for the future, they survived a lot better. Viktor Frankl had made the same observation when he spent some time in the camps. And that's been noted by a lot of people that if you sort of say to yourself, okay, I'm half screwed, but there's still some important things that I want to try to make the most of in my life, you can handle the nonsense and the annoyances that come at you. On the other hand, if you feel that your life is just totally screwed and there's no hope, a lot of times those people give up. Okay, so that's another reason why religious people have an advantage. They tend to have more an optimistic worldview. They have this idea that life has meaning, my life has meaning, and all this stuff, Jesus loves me, or whatever it might be for their religion. And they just do better. I've seen a lot of bad outcomes in atheists where they have difficulties in their life, setbacks, divorce, or other things, and they just give up. Okay, so let's see what else here. Things like comedy, being around friends, all that stuff, it just makes you feel better because you switch to a PANS. PANS means parasympathetic autonomic nervous system. You have an autonomic nervous system, and it's between, there's an accelerator, which is SANS, sympathetic, autonomic, fight or flight, and then there's PANS, parasympathetic, and that's parasympathetic is good, rest and digest, feed and breed, okay? We wish we could spend more time in that phase of our life. SANS is the stressed out thing, fight or flight, danger, okay? So you want to spend more time in PANS to the extent that's possible, because when you're mellowed out, you don't have the stress hormones elevated, so they're not going to have that negative effect on your immune system. Get your sunshine. When you have decent vitamin D, your immune system works better. Okay. Oops. All right. This right here is just a little more detail of what I showed you earlier. So here's a dendritic cell, like a starfish, sitting behind the epithelial cells. There's a breach in the tight junction. The bacteria start piling in through. The dendritic cell, macrophage, it's like a Pac-Man, eats the bacteria, then it jumps into the lymphatic, and it makes a run for the lymph node. I kind of joke, it's like Paul Revere's ride, running through the lymphatic, getting to the lymph node. And then as soon as it gets to the lymph node, it's like saying, are you my mother? Are you my mother? Are you my mother? Will you please help me? Will you please help me? And, there's millions of these lymphocytes, and almost all of them have no interest whatsoever in this dendritic cell because they're cell surface receptors do not match. You can see too, it ate the purple bacteria and then it chops it up into little pieces and it puts little pieces of the bacteria all along its outer surface. And then the other lymphocytes, they feel it by braille. So it has to bump into like millions of them. And they go, nope, not me, not me, not me, not my job, not my job, not my job. And then soon it'll hit one and it'll stick. And they go, yes, it's a match. You know, you're my mother or whatever. It sticks and it goes, okay, you can help me. You can help me. Come on, let's go. Let's go. Now make copies of yourself. You have to make a whole bunch of copies of yourself. That's called clonal expansion. So you'll have more guys that are able to fight that particular infection. And again, it's all by reading Braille. And this is another reason too why I believe in God, because I studied it. You know, there's a lot of simplistic people who've never studied any biology. They think, oh, you don't need this. It all just happened around. BS. You've got billions and billions of these immune cells, and they're so sophisticated, so intelligent, so capable of doing so much. It's amazing. Okay, same thing with the human eye, the human brain, the clotting system. It goes on and on. It's just too extraordinary to have happened by accident. I say to myself too, like John Lennox, he's an Oxford mathematician. He says, if you walk to the beach and you see your name written in the sand next to the ocean, you go, wow, somebody who knows me, who knows how to write, a literate person wrote my name. You wouldn't say the ocean wrote your name, okay, 5 letters. And what I'm saying is, what is your DNA? Your DNA of a human genome is 3.3 billion base pairs. 3.3 billion base pairs of very complex chemistry. That's going to spontaneously write itself? BS, I don't think so. I was an A+ student, by the way, at Stanford in evolutionary biology, and I've read about 50 books on the subject. I'm very familiar with the subject, okay? It's way, way more complicated than someone who hasn't studied it would think, okay? All right, so anyways, what are some things that got me interested in the immune system lately? Well, I look at a lot of necks, okay? One of the things I do, I was an imaging guided surgeon. Now I work mostly as a neuroradiologist. I've done over 1,000 biopsies in the neck. And pretty much if there's a problem in the neck, it's going to end up coming to me. So what had happened was there's some guys out of New York, you know, the Peter Som group and also the ear, nose, and throat surgeons. They made a classification system of the neck lymph nodes. And there's criteria for each location, whether or not it's probably cancer and should be biopsied. And here's what the problem was. They made the criteria based on a bunch of old guys, 70 years old, with head and neck squamous cell carcinoma. Okay, fine. But here's the problem. That classification system was then started to be applied to younger people, you know, like 30-year-olds. And guess what? 30-year-olds just have big lymph nodes because they're young and healthy, not because they have metastatic cancer causing the lymph node to hypertrophy. So I kept getting all these patients sent to me for biopsy, and I'm like, this is a normal person. So what the main point of this is, as people get older, their immune system atrophies. And I sort of like wondering, why do some people atrophy faster than others? And I had a friend who had worked in residency at a hospital next to Chinatown. And the Chinatown resident told me that the old attendings in her group, the senior physician said, these Chinese brains look so good. Why do these Chinese brains look so good? This right here is a typical old, demented brain. There's a big cerebral spinal fluid space between the inner table of the skull and the brain parenchyma. This dark stuff here is cerebral spinal fluid. So this would be a typical atrophic, shrunken, demented brain. I see these every day. Whereas a young person would be more like in the back here. It's sort of sinking down by gravity, but you see how the brain is up tight against the skull? So we call that a tight brain. Young people usually have a tight brain with brain parenchyma right next to the skull all the way around circumferentially. Okay, so they were seeing a lot of tight brains in old people. And they're like, why do these, Chinese look so good? And what we think has happened is because they're eating their old-fashioned, rice-based diet. Back before 1970, Chinese were eating like 70% of their calories from white rice, and there's only 1% of its calories from fat. So they get almost no diabetes, nobody's fat, no hypertension, other than if they're eating tons of sodium or smoking. So anyways, I thought that was interesting. And there's a couple different theories, neurodegeneration. We're not going to get into that too much, but still it said to me, well, maybe if we can slow down our brain shrinking and atrophying, maybe we can preserve our immune system to function better. Okay, and then also there's a concept of the Hayflick limit. So what is Hayflick limit about? Leonard Hayflick was a microbiologist working with human tissue cultures, and he noticed that typically the cells can only divide about 60 times. There's exceptions to that. There's stem cells, there's gonadal cells, fine. But the average cell of the body, they call them somatic, soma means body. So the average body cell divides 60 times and then it just dies. Why does that happen? It's thought that once each time a cell divides, it's got something called a chromosome. Imagine this is a chromosome. At the end of the chromosome, like my fingernail, call that a telomere. It's also like the tight thing on a shoelace end is called a telomere. You have to shorten it every time the cell divides. And once you shorten past the fingernail, so to speak, you start shortening into genes that the cell needs. So you get 60 cell divisions, and by then you're shortened into genes the cell needs to survive, and the cell dies, okay? So wouldn't it be nice if you could keep your telomeres longer? And psychological stress causes accelerated shortening of the telomeres, so that's bad. But it also turns out eating a high meat diet that activates mTOR will also have a similar effect. Okay, so you don't want to do things that accelerate your aging. Okay, so mTOR is mammalian targeted rapamycin, also called mechanistic targeted rapamycin. And it's like a building contractor getting ready to build a building, but it can't build until it has all the building materials available. And the rate limiting step is very often leucine, which is an amino acid much more common in meat. So, think about it. Animal protein in humans has a bit of an anabolic effect, which you might like it when you're 20 years old, you're a guy lifting weights, you want to get big muscles real strong and fast, but you're older, you don't want that. I mean, think about what cow's milk is for. It's to make a baby cow gain 600 pounds in 6 months, okay? You don't want to be drinking that, okay? That's not made for humans. All right, so that activates mTOR, all right? We talked about, stress causing immune system atrophy. Some of these chemicals like sodium can cause hyperactive immune responses in a bad way, and can cause increased asthma, for example. Some of these estrogenic chemicals can be harmful to the immune system too. 80% of autoimmune diseases occur in women. And then I'll show you some more things too related to all this. Okay, so I think, let me make sure where this slide is. Oh, I hadn't shown you this slide yet. I talked about it, but I didn't show it to you. So yeah, blood labs are better for everything in low-fat vegans. Lower white blood cell counts, lower C-reactive protein, lower blood lipids, less fatty liver, less diabetes, lower body weight, more optimal body weight, less atherosclerosis, less leaky gut. And people sometimes ask me, well, what are the negative sides of being a vegan? Well, you got to take vitamin B12. I take methylcobalamin. I would never take cyano. I'm afraid that might accumulate. So I take methylcobalamin. That's it. Okay. And then here's one of the downsides is that you'll become so healthy and skinny, your spouse is going to become very jealous. Okay. They'll say, as soon as you do all this, you lose all this weight, you start looking so good, your spouse starts. Because I said that. I lost all this weight when I first got healthy, and one of the secretaries said, "Ooh, Dr. Rogers, you're looking so good. I bet every time you touch that door, your wife be saying, 'Where you going? Where you going?'" That's how you know she's jealous. And I said, "Yeah, I'm familiar with that." Okay, so this is a painting from the ancient Greeks, and this was Narcissus, and he fell in love with his reflection in the water. This right here is Echo. Echo was a forest nymph. And Echo got in trouble because one of her girlfriends was having an affair with Zeus, and Zeus's wife was Hera. And when Hera came looking for Zeus, she kind of stalled Hera and was like chit-chatting with her in a way to distract her away from Zeus philandering with her friend. So Hera punished her by not allowing her to speak regular. She could only echo what other people said. So anyways, Echo fell in love with Narcissus and was having a hard time getting his attention, because he's in love with his reflection in the water. And there's different versions of the legend, but one of them is that he starves to death because he couldn't stop looking at his reflection. But anyways, be that as it may, you'll age a lot better than your spouse, and that potentially might cause a little bit of things. Okay, there's a guy by the name of Alan Cunningham, and Dr. McDougall first brought this to my attention, and that meat eaters get a lot more lymphomas. And it's thought that it causes overactivation of the immune system due to the chronic inflammation. Okay. And one thing too, I'm just going to say it is Dr. McDougall, I don't know if you've all heard, I just found out myself, he died. He was a great doctor, a great nutrition person, and he just died. So that's very sad. I mean, now's not the time to talk about it, but it was a very sad thing that just happened. It's not clear why he died. So we've addressed that. That's something to talk about at a separate time. Okay, so I'll go back to my next slide here. All right, so anyways, the point was excessive meat intake can increase the activity of the immune system and lead to it becoming overactivated and causing lymphoma. Also, eating plant-based diets lowers the risk of getting lymphomas. Okay, so I thought that was interesting. And then they found that some people, when they go on a fast, this is just one case report, but their lymphoma went away. And it stayed away 9 months later. And they actually done some more follow-up and had pretty good results too. So now, again, that's just a case report, but that's encouraging. I mean, if I had a cancer and I could get improved without having to take chemo or surgery, I would do it. Okay, don't get me wrong. Sometimes chemo and surgery are the best way to go, but if you can get away with it some other way, wouldn't that be nice? Here's a researcher named Lydia Lynch. She's an immunologist at Harvard, and she started studying the relationship between diet and immune system function. First of all, she noticed that no matter what type of fat you fed the mouse, they all got fat. It didn't matter if it was, sat fat or an oil or peanut butter or lard or coconut. Every single fat you gave them, they all made the mice fat. So that's one thing I say too. Any fat you eat makes you fat. Okay, but then she noticed that the fats prevented the immune system from working. That's a big problem. Okay, so actually, let me see here. Okay, so all fat made the animal fat. And just the mouse becoming fat, they start getting what's called a spillover effect and leaking more fat into the blood, increased free fatty acids in the blood. So no matter how you sliced it, more dietary fat made you fat and made you sick. You got more fatty liver. You got more insulin resistance, more diabetes. But the big thing related to what we're talking about here that would worry me is it turned off your NK cells. That's a type of lymphocyte that's part of your innate immune system, natural killer cells, that removes cancer cells and prevents infections. And also your CD8. Those are the killer T cells. So the stuff that actually fights the cancer, fights the infection, it's shut off by eating the fat. Okay, so you can't win with fat because a lot of people try to say, good fats. And I'm like, good fats, I'm not buying it. I don't think there's any good fats except the fiber you eat, which some of it gets converted to fat, and the tiny amounts of healthy fats in your plant foods. That's what you get. In my opinion, that's all you need. There's a good reason why I say that. I've studied it extensively. We're not going to get into all the details here today. So basically, it shut off the active part of the immune system, and it actually increased the activity of what are called the Tregs, T regulator cells. So basically, the high-fat diet, along with being stressed out, which is what the typical American does, made it easier for cancer to grow and spread. So you don't want that. There's no win in it. Okay, so I wouldn't go there. Okay. In addition, basically the way she describes her research is that the high-fat diets would paralyze the NK cells, natural killer cells, so they couldn't effectively remove the infected cells from the body, the infections, the cancer cells. So it was bad. This is a direct quote from her. The fat paralyzed the natural killer cells and also the cytotoxic T cells, the killer lymphocytes. Neil Bernard had said the immune system can't work in an oil slick. Okay, so it's an oversimplification, but it's correct on the point. So here's a little bit about psychological stress. Psychological stress, really the center of the brain, the headquarters, top-notch control of your emotions comes out of the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is, again, there's a lot of things in the body that are kind of like a seesaw. Most of the time you're in a relatively parasympathetic phase of your life. That's good for feed and breed, rest and digest, or just do whatever you're doing. It's a regular day. All right. Fight or flight is when, there is danger. There's a physical threat coming towards you. Because our ancestors had to worry about predatory animals coming to eat them or another group of people coming to attack them. Okay, so you have to be ready for that. So you always want to maintain some alert, because if you're not alert and they come attack you and you're not prepared, you're dead. Okay, so it's game over. So what I'm saying, though, is the brain's always constantly sort of paying attention. Is there any change? Is there any danger? And so there's like a competition to see who gets the boss's attention, the hypothalamus. Hey, everything is cool. Everything is cool. Okay, good. Enjoy your food. Spend some time with your girlfriend there. Take a nap. Everything is cool. Okay, but when there's danger, hey, there's some coyotes coming that way. There's a pack of wolves. There's a group of men from, our enemy group that lives on the other side of the river. We better be ready to deal with this. Okay, so you have to be able to ramp up, but you don't want to be ramped up all the time. Okay, so you have to have good psychological judgment about your environment. And because once this ramp up signal happens, it's going to send all these hormones zooming up your stress system. So cortisol during an acute emergency event is actually a good thing. It causes your blood glucose level to shoot up. If your blood glucose level didn't do that, you don't have enough glucose floating around in your blood under routine circumstances to give you the energy to climb to the top of the tree and protect yourself. So you have to jack it up, okay? Same thing, you need to get some lipids in there, which can be burned by some of your other tissues, okay? So you want that. But if you chronically have your cortisol high, you're screwed because your immune system is turned off. You're going to be prone to infections, prone to cancer, prone to muscle wasting, prone to bone wasting, osteoporosis, all these problems. So we've all seen people in our lives who just couldn't handle the psychological stress that they were exposed to and couldn't figure out how to deal with it, and they just deteriorate. So you don't want that to happen. You have to have the ability to sort of work through it, work around it, whatever's involved, and having an attitude of gratitude or whatever, some way to say to yourself, because all of us have problems. And what I sort of say to myself is, okay, I'm half screwed, but at least I'm not totally screwed like a lot of people are. So I'll be grateful for that. And I'll just try to make the most out of that. And I think that type of attitude helps you to deal with things, and so when you sort of are able to see the good in your situation, despite the problems, then you can just deal with it and you become more resilient. And so it's important to have that. They joke that the centenarians, they tend to be able to make lemonade out of lemons. Okay. There's other researchers, and this guy, Nav Chandel, he's a famous researcher for mitochondria. And he said his work has shown him that, genetics aren't the main deal. It's metabolism, what we eat, how we live. And the genes have some effect, but they're usually not the driving force. He says metabolism is the driver of our health. Genes are just the passenger. Okay, and anybody might remember this movie. It was a great movie with Steve Martin and John Candy. Very funny, called Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Okay, so anyways, and this guy, Luke O'Neill, he's a researcher from Ireland, and he said the same thing. I hear this because I studied a whole bunch of immune system research. He says the mitochondria are the powerhouse of immunity. They're right in the center of it, of everything. Okay, and I've had my friends too, not to brag, but my friends are telling me, Pete, you're figuring out all this pathophysiology at a really high advanced level, and you figured out all this stuff about the mitochondria. And he's like, we should be focusing on mitochondria, cytoplasm, calcium levels. Instead, we're giving drugs that damage the mitochondria, increase the cytoplasm calcium. And these are internal medicine doctors, really the best ones. And they're saying to me, drug-based medicine for chronic disease is stupid. So I'm just letting you know, just because something comes from some big fancy institution doesn't mean it's not stupid. Think about it if you're like at one of the Ivy League schools. You want to get promoted as a professor so you get a bigger paycheck, okay? You get more vacation time. In order to get that promotion, you got to do published research, so you got to get grant money. In order to get grant money, you got to make some big drug company give you money. You think they're going to give you money to say that you can get a better result with the vegan diet? No way. You have to make their drugs look good, or you don't get grant money. You don't get grant money, you don't get promoted. So what I'm basically saying is the system is self-reinforcing, that it has to be based on drugs. And that's why anything coming out of the Ivy League, it's going to be, you need more drugs. Okay, so that's why I'm also saying a lot of times I look at their papers and I laugh at them. They're a joke because they're just attempts to sell drugs. Okay, and the regular person in the audience, you need to know this, because if you walk into a healthcare situation thinking, oh, I'm here going to these fine experts who are going to help me restore my health, then you're a chump. That's like walking into a store thinking that the salesperson's not going to try to sell you something. Okay, they make money, they pay their bills, they pay for their family vacations by selling you drugs. So that's what they're going to try to do. And if you're aware of that, you'll be able to use the situation intelligently. So when you need it, you can get something, but you can avoid it as much as possible. Because I see tons of patients walking in the hospital and they're like a deer in the headlights, because it'll be an impressive building, all this fancy stuff and fancy machines. And they don't realize a lot of times those fancy machines are much less powerful than them just eating a low-fat vegan diet. That's how it is most of the time. Okay, so now let me show you this next slide here of this is what's called Krebs cycle. This is in the center of the mitochondria. The mitochondrial membrane in the periphery is where you have electron transport, oxphos to make ATP. But in the center, you primarily run Krebs cycle. It's also called TCA, tricarboxylic acid cycle. So a normal cell runs this clockwise, and the net result is a lot more ATP is going to be made. Cancer will run it backwards. This is reverse Krebs cycle, because you can synthesize more of some molecules that cancer needs to grow. So this is an important point, is that Krebs cycle was present in our anaerobic bacteria ancestors, and they used to use it a lot for biosynthesis by running it backwards. And then our oxygen-using ancestors learned how to run it forwards clockwise. Okay, well, the relevance is when you get cancer, it'll often switch backwards to functioning like an anaerobic bacteria and run backwards. And then there's even one more thing, even more interesting about Krebs cycle, is the immune system, when it's fighting infections, it can also cut Krebs cycle in half and start using it to make other things that it doesn't normally make, something called itaconate, and it can use that to fight infection. So it's rather fascinating. All right, so the bottom line, though, is you want a happy, healthy mitochondria that gets all the oxygen it needs. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the significance of this. Okay, here's a lady by the name of Maria Mittelbrun from Spain, and she was studying the immune system and its effect on aging. And the conclusion she came to is the aging of the immune system is basically parallel to the aging of the body. And if you accelerate aging in the immune system, you accelerate aging in the body. The person dies sooner. The mice die sooner. And she said there's good inflammation where you have a local infection. You cut your hand. Okay, so maybe it even gets a little infected. You wash it out, wash the infection out, put a little steri strip, bandage on there, and it heals. Okay, you're happy. Then it goes away. You get on with your life. You forget about it. That's a good job for the immune system. A bad job is chronic inflammation, eating a high-fat, high-sodium diet every day, chronically having inflammation throughout your body with that chronically elevated white blood cell content. That starts to cause all kinds of side effects. It accelerates aging in your immune system, and it leads you to have progressive health problems. So you want to try to fix these problems to the extent you can. Okay, so and then we talked about these things that make you healthier, and a lot of people aren't aware of mitochondrial inhibitors. You want to avoid those. I've talked about those in a previous lecture because other little things start happening to you as you get older. You make less endothelial nitric oxide. So in a sense, what happens is you become more fragile. Like Dr. Esselstyn will talk about how endothelial nitric oxide is diminished by the time you hit 60, a lot. I forget the exact amount, maybe as much as, well, he'll say, I think as high as 50%. I don't think it's quite that high because I think it depends on the population you're talking about. If there's sick people who eat the SAD diet, yeah, it's going to be pretty bad. But if they're still eating healthy, because I've seen incredible athletic feats in people who eat healthy and don't smoke cigarettes and get their sleep, traditional populations. So you want to try to keep doing things that you should be doing, getting your sleep, getting your exercise, getting your sun, maintain positive relationships and all that. And you can age surprisingly well. Okay. I routinely have people tell me I look like I'm in my mid 40s. I'm just telling you, I'm 60 and I lift weights with the young guys. I'm just as strong as them. I got better attention span than them. And these are smart guys. They all got graduate degrees. I tell you that because, you don't have to be, fat, weak, sick, and stupid when you get older. It's not a guarantee. All right. Here is the immune system of Maria Mittelbrun's study. And she's showing here's a good immune response by, let's say, a young, healthy person. The immune cells are first what's called naive T cells. They're involved in, responding to an infection, and they become effector cells and active. And they'll actually run on more glycolysis in the middle of the acute infection and their response. And then they'll come back to normal. Now they've been primed. They're no longer naive, so to speak, because they've interacted with an outside infection. But they still come back to a predominantly oxidative metabolism. Okay, so that's a short, transient, controlled immune response is exactly what you want. On the other hand, a lot of old people end up in this situation, and it reminds me very much of the Warburg effect with cancer, where they were able previously to ramp up and fight an infection, but they're not able to come back down to normal. They got damaged mitochondria, and the damaged mitochondria keeps them relying on using more anaerobic glycolysis than they normally would. And her research group, what they found was that these are damaged T cells, and these mice, they don't do well. They have a premature death and a premature weakened ability to fight, infections and cancer. So the mouse die much sooner. And so you don't want that. You don't want that's why you want to avoid mitochondrial toxins. You want to avoid these high-fat diets, high-sodium diets. You're just damaging your tissue. You're damaging it in multiple ways. Okay, I was going to show this slide here is, I showed Thomas Jefferson just because he was a really fit guy and he used to walk a lot. He'd walk miles and miles every afternoon. So he would do all his intellectual work in the morning and walk. And I studied a lot of geniuses. I wanted to try to become a genius myself. So I read tons and tons of biographies on geniuses, on top-notch academic intellectual performance. And it's a very common thing that they walk tons. Okay, Beethoven used to walk a lot, Johann von Wolfgang Goethe, Nietzsche, and a whole bunch of other ones. Okay, so anyways, we talked about this earlier. The immune system, the lymphatics are all parallel to, here's the arteries in red, the veins in blue, connected to the heart, but the lymphatics are all parallel to these vessels, but they don't have any pump. So the way you pump them is you keep moving, you exercise. Okay, and exercise also makes you smart. You want to age better than your spouse. One of the big things is to keep your smarts about you so you stay more interesting as a person. Tadpole in its baby phase, it's swimming around. It has a brain, okay? And then in its adult phase, it attaches to a rock, becomes a filter feeder, and its brain is reabsorbed. It disappears. And the point is, if you're just going to sit on a rock as a filter feeder, you don't need to. You don't need a brain. Okay. Voltaire had asked the question, why do animals have brain but plants do not? Because the animal moves. As soon as you start moving, you got to make a value judgment. I shall go over there towards the fruit tree to get something to eat. I'll avoid that area because there's a bunch of wolves over there. It looks dangerous, okay? And then you have to navigate to your destination. You have to avoid obstacles in your path. You have to remember how to get back to where you came from. You need a brain, okay? And more of our brain is devoted to movement than it is to thinking or anything else, okay? You know, lots of devoted to vision because we need vision to move. All right, so that's another reason why when you exercise, you keep all your neurons working. The brains use it or lose it. If you're using neurons in your brain for all these motor functions and cognitive activities, you will maintain those things. Your brain sort of it's resource shortage, okay? It says, okay, if you need to do this, we'll keep your ability to do it. But if you don't do something anymore, you'll lose that ability, okay? I used to wrestle in college, okay? And I didn't wrestle for many years because I was too busy working and studying for medical school. Now it's kind of hard for me. I wrestle my nephew a little bit. He's a pretty good high school wrestler, but I ain't what I used to be on a wrestling mat. Use it or lose it. You know, you got to keep that physical fitness level or you lose it. Okay, so here's a couple interesting things. First is the AMPK pathway, which is sort of like adenosine monophosphate. Instead of ATP, adenosine triphosphate, it's mono. So there's 2 less phosphates on there. And the point is when you exercise, your cells get tired and you deplete your ATP. And so then when you rest, the cell's trying to build back its ATP reservoir. And that's good because what it does is it sort of turns off mTOR. The cell sends a message to the mTOR and says, look, we are depleted of energy. We need to rest and renew ourselves and build up our energy stores. No growing. We cannot replicate at this time. And so by turning off mTOR, the cell doesn't replicate and you prevent your cancer from growing. That's exactly what you want. Okay, now here is something called karoshi. Karoshi is a Japanese word. And it means a workaholic who just drops dead from overwork. Okay, so the Japanese are kind of famous for being really hard workers. And so the point is, yeah, it's good to be a hard worker, but, you know, make sure you have, you know, was that all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy? You got to have a little bit of fun or at least rest. Okay, otherwise you're going to end up like a karoshi, okay? Oh, the other thing, too, to keep your brain smart, a lot of people say, oh, I don't know, because I know tons of people. I can tell you the vast majority of doctors I know, they don't read. They're functional illiterates, okay? I know they learned how to read in school, but they don't ever read anything. I talk to them all the time. I talk to them every day. And what I'm saying is, if you just think about it, it's easy to read at least 2 books a week. Here's what you do. In my car, I always listen to an audio CD. I got about a 1-hour commute each way. So that's 2 hours every day, automatic reading. In my bathroom, every time I go in there, I have a little movable table. I can move it with my foot. I'll read some book when I'm on number 2. I'll read another book on number 1. I don't go out of that bathroom if I don't have at least 1 book. So I typically read about 1 book every week in there. 1 book every week in the car. 10 hours is the average book. And then I usually read something or I'll watch a DVD while I'm eating dinner. I mean, if somebody's around, I'll talk to them, fine. But most of the time, I'm alone. And so by just doing that, it's pretty easy. I pretty often read 3 books in a week in that way. Okay. And I don't do anything. I don't make any special time. It just happens. So that's how you get more stuff done. Okay. I'll give you another example. Where I work, I'm not going to get into all the details of it, but the bottom line is I have a choice. Take the elevator or take the stairs. And I have to do a lot of stairs. Every day I take the stairs. And you know what? I don't just walk and cry like a wimp. I go as fast as I can, okay, without hurting my ankle. And so it costs me nothing. And I get an instant workout, high-intensity interval training, okay? And you know how many other people do that? Almost none. About 1 out of 1,000. So, you know, you go into a hospital, you see all these fat nurses, you see a lot of fat doctors, fat secretaries, and they got a free health club sitting there. Just take the stairs up to one of the higher floors every day, and you'll have pretty good fitness. That's all you have to do. And that takes you 5 minutes, and they won't do it. Okay? So that's why, you know, I know a lot of people, it's not because they have bad genes, it's because they're lazy, okay? And they simply need to think about it. Just say, could I, you know, park your car a little farther so you walk more. When you have to walk back to your car at the end of the day, walk fast. Because if you push yourself, use it or lose it, you will keep the ability to walk fast. I mean, it's not rocket science, and you could do it and without having to change your whole life. Okay, and the other thing I do is medically, a lot of people think, I'm going to do something proactive. I'm going to go for a medical test. Let me tell you something. There's always going to be doctors that are happy to put a tube down your throat, happy to put one up your butt, send you for a CAT scan, an ultrasound, an MRI, you name it. If you take a picture of a disease, you don't cure it. You cure a disease by healthy eating, okay? because I know it's like Canterbury Tales, the big pilgrimage to the hospital. I see 1,000 patients, every day flood into hospitals like a river. And almost all of them are overweight with diabetes and hypertension. And they're all going for their medical tests. They'll sit in the waiting room and they'll talk to each other. Oh, I had an ultrasound last week. I had this and that. How many of those patients are becoming low-fat vegans? 1 out of 20,000 maybe. Okay. They're all fat and sick. I can tell you they never get better. I've never seen a patient cured ever with drugs. Not a single one. For diabetes, hypertension, obesity, coronary artery disease. Okay. Longevity for stenting, cardiothoracic bypass doesn't change their likelihood of living any longer or their likelihood of having a recurrent myocardial infarction. So what I'm trying to say is all this whiz bang, bells and whistles, fancy stuff, it's quite overrated. Okay, you want to prevent all these abdominal pressure syndromes. Eat your fiber. Okay, these are all, I talked about these before in my lectures. Abdominal pressure syndrome, Dennis-Burkitt. Eat your fiber and you don't get all this stuff. Diverticulitis, appendicitis, gallstones, hiatal hernia, GERD. You might have a small risk of getting it, but very small. I've known doctors from other countries that I've worked with, and they say, in my country, we eat a lot of fiber. We don't get this nonsense. It's true. Okay, here's a little bit about leaky gut. Same thing. You got an epithelial barrier on your intestinal lining. These are called enterocytes because your gut's called the enteric tract, but you could also call them intestinal epithelial cells. And then here's your tight junctions. And they protect, so bacteria doesn't come flooding in. Your dendritic cells will sometimes, shaped like a starfish, will sometimes stick a probe up and just kind of sample the fluid around there for bacteria and stuff. So the gut's very good at defending itself under normal conditions. But what the gut needs is fiber. The fiber is taken by the good bacteria. I gave them smiley faces here, and they make short-chain fatty acids. Excuse me. The most important one is butyrate, and then the butyrate is used by the epithelial cells to make tight junctions, and that gives you a happy, healthy intestinal lining. Fiber is only present in plant foods. There's zero fiber in meat, very little in processed foods. Okay, now here, this whole list here about like 25 things are all the things that cause leaky gut. Leaky gut's another way of saying increased intestinal permeability. And what it's due to is a breakdown in the tight junctions. So if you break down in these tight junctions, then your gut's got a problem because now bacteria can get through the breach. The bacterial endotoxins like LPS can get through the breach. And they're going to stir up a big inflammatory response. You can get localized inflammation in your gut, things like ulcerative colitis, things like Crohn's disease, irritable bowel syndrome. You'll also get big chunks of protein. Normally only a tripeptide, that means 3 amino acids connected or smaller, can be absorbed at a time through the enterocytes. But when you got a break in the tight junctions, you can get a whole big chunk of protein breaking through the gap in the tight junctions. And once it gets through, now you've got this big piece of protein. The immune system goes, uh-oh, what is this? And it binds it with its pattern recognition receptors. And then it sort of will ingest the protein, and it'll break into little pieces like I showed you with the dendritic cell, express it on its cell surface. But here's the catch. Because that piece of protein is now coming from somebody eating animal foods, that protein in an animal food might be quite similar to the proteins in their own body. You get it? So it then bounces around through the lymph node, interacts with a lymphocyte. The lymphocyte binds it and says, yep, I got a match. It says, okay, let's start making antibodies. So it makes antibodies to that protein on its outer surface that comes from an animal protein. But guess what? The amino acid sequence, protein's like a string of amino acids, like beads on a necklace, is so similar to the body's own protein that that antibody will then cross-react with protein in the person's own body. Does that make sense? So it's called molecular mimicry, meaning that the animal protein, the meat or the dairy they just ate, had some components in it with similar amino acid sequences to the human's own proteins. And the antibodies get confused. They just know that sequence, and they go looking for it, okay? And so they then attack their own body. That's what autoimmune disease is. This is the main mechanism of autoimmune disease. So that's why you don't want to eat that way. You got to get more fiber. On average, Dennis-Burkitt felt we probably are eating over typically 100 grams a day of fiber. My diet, I eat over 100 grams a day, pretty routine because I eat 100% vegan. Okay, but our average American only eats about 10. Okay, you really want to eat like about a minimum of 50. So what ends up happening is Americans are predisposed to leaky gut. So not only are they depleted in their diet of fiber, but they're typically exposed to many of these chemicals. Like I'll show you these chemicals. You'd be surprised. Look how common these are. Lots of people eat food with oil, fried food. Lots of people eat animal foods with fat, meat, dairy, all this stuff. Lots of people eat non-organic food with these chemicals in it, these herbicides. Lots of people are stressed out, excessive caffeine. Lots of people have water with F- in it. They don't filter the water, a lot of chlorine in it. They eat processed food with all these chemicals in there like polysorbate, carrageenan, emulsifiers, you name it, GMO corn. It goes on and on, high fructose corn syrup. All of these things cause leaky gut. So many people are ingesting on a routine basis 10, 15, 20 of these things, and then they're not eating fiber, and gee, they can't understand why their gut's all screwed up. It's not rocket science. If I had an autoimmune disease or gut problem, I would make sure I was avoiding every single one of those things, okay, and I was eating a lot of fiber. So, a lot of times they're going to tell you, well, you need to take a probiotic this, probiotic that. I'm like, why not just eat the fiber? That's what I would do. Do that first. If for some reason you still have a problem, maybe you need more than that. Okay, fine. But what I'm saying is, logically, I say to myself, there's a lot of ancestors, indigenous people that are pretty healthy. Why are they healthy? Can I just imitate them and be healthy for free? I got to eat anyways. Why not? So that's how I look at it. There's other things that happen when you have leaky gut. These endotoxins come into the blood, and they're very thrombotic. Also, the excessive iron that we ingest by eating these iron-fortified foods is all bad. Usually that doesn't become a problem initially because we have good ability to store iron up to a certain point. But once we become iron overloaded, we start leaking a little bit of iron into the blood. Okay, so why does that matter? Normally, your clotting proteins, your fibrinogen, they're shaped like a helix. So, I can look through my eye here, okay? They're shaped like a helix, like a slinky. That cylindrical shape, spiraling shape. Okay, the relevance is the LPS and the LTA will distort them, and they'll become flat. And they'll now become like a deck of cards. It's called changing from an alpha helix secondary protein structure to a beta pleated sheet secondary protein structure. And they'll then stack up. The more they stack up, the more they can bind with each other. And the bigger a molecule gets, the higher its molecular weight, the more likely it will precipitate out a solution. The body's like an aqueous solution, like water. So it'll get big, stack up, precipitate. And you get these big, bulky blood clots that are hard for the body to dissolve. They're called dense matted deposits. The English guy, Douglas Kell, and the South African lady, Atheresia Pretorius, did the work on those things. They deserve a Nobel Prize. They'll never get it because I don't think big money wants the public knowing about all this stuff. But basically, you're making your blood more prone to clotting. Why do you think people die? Because their blood clotted, okay? Everybody always, watches the movies and thinks people bleed to death. That almost never happens, okay, outside of the movies and some rare events. All day long, people die from blood clots. Clot in the heart, myocardial infarction, heart attack. Clot in the brain is a stroke. You plug up all these different areas, the thing stops working. You plug up the artery in your eye, you go blind. You plug up the artery to the nerves of your ear, you go deaf. You plug up the arteries to the Johnson, you go impotent, okay? You plug up the arteries to the spine, you get it all degenerated. So you plug up arteries to the brain, even little small ones, you don't necessarily have a big neurologic event like a stroke, but you become progressively cognitively impaired. And this is contributing to it in a big way. So you don't want leaky gut. Oh, this is just showing that when you get iron overloaded, it can do some of the same thing. Okay, here's a guy who's kind of interesting. His name is Chris Knob. He's an ophthalmologist, and he's a little bit of a pro-meat guy. I think he had something to do with Western Price organization or something, but he's a very smart guy, and he did put a lot of time into studying the epidemiology all over the world of the different diets and the health patterns. And the conclusion he came to from his research was he thought the most damaging thing to health that has increased a lot in the last 40 years was the increased intake of omega-6 cooking oils. He said that had the strongest, tightest correlation with the increases in obesity as well as diabetes. And, that's pretty similar to what the Japanese guy, Tetsumori Yamashima, said. He was a Japanese neuroscientist, asked, why are so many Japanese people becoming sick? Why are so many becoming demented and getting diabetes now? And he says, well, it's because they're eating a lot more oil. And he went through all the research of it. He came up with something called the Kalpain-Cathepsin theory of lipid peroxidation and how that's associated with toxic aldehydes like hydroxynonenal and the way that inhibits mitochondria and damages cells. It damages the pancreatic beta cells, leading to diabetes, the hippocampal cells in the brain, leading to increased poor memory and dementia, and also the arcuate nucleus of the hypothalamus, leading to inability to control appetite. So we're not going to get into the whole Tetsumori Yamashima theory, but what I'm letting you know is it's bad to eat oils. Okay, they're major toxic. I think of them as poisons. I wouldn't put that crap in my body. I'm pretty fussy too. And some people say, why are you so fussy? And it's like, because I know what happens to people who are not. They're fat, sick, and stupid, and I don't want that to happen to me. So, You got to remember the food system is dangerous. Okay. Their job of these companies, they want to make money. They want to raise, stockholder share price. They don't care about you. No one cares about you. The regulatory agencies, almost all of them are fake, paid off. No one cares about you. The sooner you realize no one cares about you, the better off you will be, because then you'll have a chance to think for yourself and figure out what to do. Okay. You can't avoid a problem until you know what the problem is. You got to recognize it. So here's a typical thing the food companies do. They do research to make you addicted to the food. They put just the right amount of fat in there, fry it. They put chemicals in there to give it texture, to get the mouthfeel. They put a sodium in there. Salt makes it taste better. They put manufacturer-free glutamate, MSG, amount of sodium. And they hit what is called a bliss point. They'll test all these little variations on a test audience until they find what do people get addicted to. And that's why you'll see commercials like, I think it was Lay's potato chips or something, bet you can't eat just one. Because, yeah, they make it taste addictive, okay? It's like they call it dietary, opioid or something. Never eat that crap. I studied like all the toxins in common foods, processed foods, and you'd be amazed how many of them there are. What is there? Is there something like 30 of them? These are common toxins in food. And I'm telling you, these things are designed to make you addicted to the food so you buy more. And they're almost, I think, designed to make you fat and also to not be able to make babies, okay? I'm telling you, there's estrogenic stuff off the charts. The classic birth control pill is the final estradiol, okay? And there's all these other things in here, these estrogenic chemicals, these herbicides, these pesticides, there's neurotoxins. There's tons of stuff in processed food. It's bad, all right? You can look at this chart for yourself. Look, things that make you fat, obesogens, it's a bunch of them. Diabetogens, things that increase diabetes risk, there's a bunch of them. Things that make you hypertension, bunch of them. Things that make you stupid. Look how many things make you stupid in typical processed food and unfiltered water. That make your blood clot more, so increase your likelihood of death. That make you have leaky gut, autoimmune disease, and more blood clotting, okay, premature death. That lose the ability to make babies for you. That suppress your immune system. That cause atherosclerosis. That increase cancer risk. They're bad, okay? But the good news is you learn about them and you can avoid them. So there's something you could do. You're not helpless, okay? One of the common things that conventional medicine tells you to go, oh, this disease is just associated with aging. It's partly genetic. Maybe it's a virus. So they're basically telling you there's nothing you could do. Just buy our pill and shut up, okay? And what I'm saying is you can look at this list and avoid all these things. And your odds get much better. So why not do it? Okay, here's just a list of some of the things that cause insulin resistance. Okay, we will not go into that right now. The main one is fat, but things that make you overeat, all that stuff. And I said, like, at first you can feel like, kind of like Don Quixote, the whole thing is hopeless. It is hopeless if you think that the agencies are going to change. You're never going to get these food companies to change. They're making billions of dollars. They think they care what you think. No, you just have to teach yourself. Because if you waste your time trying to get other people to change, get the regulatory agencies to change, you're just going to end up sad and frustrated. It's a fool's errand to try to do that. What you can do, though, is learn how to be smart. This is an old guy, an old ancient Greek, Antaeus, and he was a good wrestler, fighter guy. And he found as long as he could keep one foot on the ground, he'd be very strong. When Hercules had to fight him, Hercules picked him up off the ground. He found out that was how you make him weak. So the point I'm saying is, what am I getting at? Do what your ancestors did to be healthy, and you'll be healthy. Dennis Burkett had said the only way we're ever going to become healthier is we go back to the habits of the diets of our ancestors. What did our ancestors do? They walked around a lot all day, outdoors, getting sunshine, eating plant foods. Okay, that's what makes humans healthy. And in the end, what you want to do is kind of end up like Adam and Eve. But keep your indoor heating, keep your indoor plumbing. Nice to have those things, but Genesis 1:29. Behold, I've given you every plant, fruit. It'll be food for you. Okay, look at Psalm 23. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, because the vegan diet is by my side. So, I thought I was done there. That would have been a good ending. Okay, but I guess I got a little more. I didn't even realize I had more slides. This is just showing, I call it sometimes death by 1,000 cuts. And this is what's happened to a typical person. Like I show you, all those toxins in your food, all this other stuff, it just adds up. And the person a lot of times doesn't realize it. So they're like, they don't even know what happened. They just keep aging, getting sicker and sicker and sicker. So the smart move is learn what you can avoid, progressively avoid more of the bad stuff, do more of the good stuff like our little Super Mario Brothers character in the video game, and you'll be healthier. And just realize that it's worth the effort to learn. You can really make a big difference. I've seen dramatic differences in the health of people that would otherwise, seem to have similar risk factors. I'm going to show you a little trick for a caffeine substitute. Sometimes I got to do tons of work. It's like an unreasonable amount of work, okay? And I found that sometimes I'm a little tired. I don't get as much sleep as I should have the night before. If I just guzzle down beet juice and then chase it with some water, I find it's like a caffeine substitute. It just gets me pumped up and energized for about 6 hours. And what I like about it is because there's no caffeine. It doesn't have to be this brand. It can be any brand of beet juice. It can be any brand of water. You can just get bottled water from the home, reverse osmosis or something. What I find about it is I'm just energized, and then I don't have the caffeine insomnia effect at night, so I sleep well. I've done this hundreds of times. It works. I do it before I'm going to do personal best on my weightlifting records. They've shown in bicycle time trials they get faster, better results, more endurance, the bicycle racers. And I just know from experience, better public speaking. My performance is always better. Going upstairs, I just got more energy. I just know it works because, number one, you're hydrated. Number two, your blood sugar's up. Number three, you got nitrate precursors in there. Number four, you got potassium vasodilator precursors. So it just works. I know my squats because I keep track of my records on how much I can squat and how fast I can squat. And I know I'm a lot better after that. I drink it about 2 hours in advance. Okay, now here's why the conventional system is never going to save you, and it has no interest in saving you, because this is the old lamplight fallacy. So here's this guy, let's say he's an old drunk guy, he's looking for his keys. Okay, and another person walks by and they says, hey, did you drop your keys over here by the lamp? He says, no, I dropped them over here. And they said, well, why don't you go look over there? And he goes, oh, no, there's no light over there. All right, so the point I'm saying is conventional medicine, I just told you about the Ivy League, how research works is they always blame everything on aging, genetics, and viruses and then they always say, we're trying to make a new drug. Go ahead and listen. I listen to all these researchers saying, this might be a target for a new drug. This might be a target for a new drug. Everything always revolves around drugs because that's how they get grant money. But the fact of the matter is they never study what actually matters is nutrition. So they never cure anything. They never really accomplish much except, one out of 10,000 of them wins the lottery by coming up with a drug that makes a profit. But it's kind of like a big joke. If you look back at the progress in conventional medicine for the last 50 years and look at it objectively, you'll see very little progress. There's a few areas where they made some real progress, where there's technology, like the CAT scan machines are better, the ultrasound machines are better, the MRI machines are all better, and you can do procedures with them. That's all better. But in terms of the basic stuff, diabetes is worse than ever. Coronary artery disease is as bad as ever or worse than ever. More people are cognitively demented than ever. So there's very little progress. The cancer patients are worse than ever. So, they'll have a little breakthrough here and there, but it's usually pretty insignificant. This is just a slide showing that, the regulatory agencies, they're not going to do anything in your favor because big business can always pay them off pretty easy. So that it's never going to happen. I was going to show you this one here too. This is about a question one time that my kid asked me. My kid felt that the teacher in school had ripped him off on a grade. This was many, many years ago. My kid was like in junior high. And he said it was not fair because he wrote a good paper and he got like a B or a C on it. I don't remember exactly. But, and he's like wondering what could he do about it. I go, well, just let this one go. It's not that big of a deal. But I do agree with you. You did a good job in the paper. The teacher was unfair. But I said, to some extent, you just got to, let me tell you a story about a rabbit. There was a rabbit hopping down the bunny trail. Okay. And the rabbit looks up in a tree and there's a hawk. Okay. Then the rabbit goes, uh-oh, looks over to the side and there's a fox running towards the rabbit. And he says, well, how about if I go this way? And there's a big snake over there. And the rabbit's like, oh, crap, pretty dangerous out here. And what I'm saying is, do you think the rabbit could get the hawk, the snake, or the fox to change their behavior? Never in a million years. They're not going to change. They eat rabbits. That's just the way the world is. So if the rabbit wants to survive a long time in this forest, the rabbit better have a system of burrows, learn how to hide. The rabbit better pay attention to the birds, like the radar of the forest, to know when trouble's coming. And I said, son, you're a rabbit. So you just have to learn how to interact with your environment and accept the fact it's not fair, it's not right, it's just what it is, and learn how to deal with it. And the same thing for adults. You try to understand your environment as best you can and get the most out of it. But the people who are sitting around thinking that it's supposed to change or it's going to change for their interest, I think they're going to be very sadly mistaken. So here's a little metaphor about life. These are a beautiful set of paintings by Thomas Cole. He made these in the 1830s. And so this is called The Voyage of Life. And here is the young man, and he set out, and he's got his idea of his imagined perfect future, utopia, and he's heading down the stream towards utopia. and he's confident. He's not even looking back at mom, his guardian angel. I'll see you later, mom. Everything's cool. I know what I got to do. I know what I got to do. Okay, so he's headed out and says this. Okay, but one of the things he doesn't recognize, if you look closely at this river, there's a turn in the bend, and then the river starts heading towards the rapids, and there's a lot of rocks. Okay, and I think that happens to a lot of us. We're in our 20s. Everything is great. You know, we're at high school with our girlfriend or boyfriend. Everything is great, and our friends, and all of a sudden, we're in the real world. We got no money. We don't have as good of prospects as we thought. We're having to work ourselves into the ground. And we're like, what happened? And then we get sick on top of it. You're like, uh-oh, what is going on? So here is the next painting from this series by Thomas Cole, Hudson River School. I think he's one of the greatest story painters of all time, perhaps except Michelangelo on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. This guy's a magnificent story painter. So here's the next phase of life. And here's a guy in middle age, and his boat's going over the rocky rapids. His oars have fallen out of the boat, and he's like, uh-oh. And his guardian angel is farther and farther away. There's almost like it's almost like a misty demon floating towards him. Things are dangerous. Things are scary. And I think a lot of people find themselves in middle age like this, an uh-oh moment. Uh-oh. I don't know what happened, but something's wrong. What can I do to get out of this mess? Okay, and I said that it reminds me, too, of Dante from Divine Comedy. In middle age, I found myself in a dark wood and the path was lost. So it's kind of like me. When I got fat in my mid-30s, I'm like, how did this happen? You know, I was working too much, had a baby at home with the wife, was stressed out, and all of a sudden I'm fat. And I go, well, I'll just exercise more and eat less. But that didn't work for like 3 years. And I'm like, uh-oh, I better start learning about this or I'm screwed. And my whole family's laughing at me, making fun of me. Hey, fatso. And then my wife's like, well, if you become impotent, my life will be easier. And I'm like, oh my God, there's no way I'm going to let this happen. So I just became obsessed with studying nutrition and health from this point of view. Oh, here's a picture of it. This is how fat I was. I got up to 220 pounds, which is real fat for me. And then when I finally figured out how to lose all the weight, I got back down. I actually went as low as 155. I'm actually now about 175, but I'm strong. I lift weights all the time. I authored a textbook that year, too. I tried to do 2 fellowships simultaneously. I was a total workaholic, and I got fat and sick for a while. And then I said, okay, so how good is conventional medicine overall? Maybe for some stuff. It's good for a few things. Emergency room is good at some things. They're good at a lot of fancy stuff. But overall, that's about where it's at. So then I laugh, though, for chronic disease, conventional medicine is a joke. And it reminds me, too, this is when Dante was with Virgil, and, you know, he goes to the gates of hell, the inferno. And on top of the gates of hell, there's a sign that says, abandon hope, all ye who enter. That's what conventional medicine says. It basically tells the patient indirectly, even though the patient doesn't understand what's going on. It says, abandon hope. We will never cure you. You're going to take these pills every day the rest of your life. And I said, you know, conventional medicine calls itself the gold standard, but really it's a joke. It's like a sports team that loses every game. Could you imagine the cheerleaders saying, we're the best. We never win. We're the best. We always lose. It's ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. It's like amazingly ridiculous. Okay. And, you know, typical middle-aged guy, a lot of times they're fat. They think it's a beer belly. They don't even understand. They really look like a pregnant female. And their breasts are like boobs, man boobs, and there's gynecomastia. If you look at them on a CT scan, they're not just fat. And so what I'm saying is, what is the credibility rating for conventional medicine in the treatment of chronic disease? It's less than 0. Same thing for the credibility of the keto, paleo, low-carb, carnivore diet. All these things make you fat and sick, okay? They're stupid. All right, and so what happens to the typical person I see? The typical middle-aged guy with these diseases or woman, they go in and take a bunch of pills that don't work so well for things like diabetes, hypertension, obesity, coronary artery disease, and they end up getting chumped. The system milks them every day for money, and they don't get better. And can you get better? Is it possible to reverse atherosclerosis? Yeah, you can reabsorb the lipid component of an atherosclerotic plaque. By the way, an atherosclerotic plaque is a blood clot. You can reabsorb the necrotic core, the acute clot components, potentially. But you got to improve your habits, reduce your dietary fat, your dietary sodium, and turn things around. But the good news is you can restore endothelial function and start making nitric oxide very quickly and gradually resorb much of the plaque. You're not going to resorb all of it. There's some controversy about whether or not you can absorb the calcium. If you can, it's pretty slow and minimal. So I wouldn't focus on that, but you don't need to. It's over r to the 4th, the radius. So just a little bit of increased diameter will give you a lot of an increase in flow. Okay, so you want to do basically the good things that maintain your life, your exercise, your sleep, your positive relationships, all the stuff we talked about. And you want to avoid the things that make you sick, the high-fat diets, the meat, the oils, the negative relationships where somebody's stressing you out for no reason, all these toxins in your food, all this stuff, okay? And I also talk about how you look at diseases. Like a conventional doctor looks at these diseases as if they're a bunch of separate things. And so their mindset is, match the ill to the pill, send the bill. So let's say there's 15 diseases. They need 15 different drugs to treat all this stuff. Okay. And it's a great way to sell drugs. And that's the way doctors are trained. That's the way they all think. That's the way I remember thinking my second year when I did pharmacology in med school. This is great. You just match the ill to the pill, send a bill. There's a treatment for everything. I assumed when I was young that would cure the disease. I was young. I didn't realize that in real life, patients never cured. And that's perfect. If you cure a patient, you lose a customer. But when you start looking at things from a nutritional point of view, things get a little different. Here is the 6 blind men or 5 blind men and an elephant. The idea of, to really understand a subject, I try to read about it from multiple different perspectives. What did they find in the animal studies? What did they find in the human studies? Any dietary studies? And sure, I'll look at the pharmacological studies. What's been my personal experience? What's the personal experience of having this disease? Did a patient ever write about having the disease? What's the comparative anatomy of humans versus another animal relevant to this? What's the history of this disease? The epidemiology of this disease? And once you look at all that, then you can kind of get a bird's eye view as if you're looking from above. Nice painting here. This is Caspar David Friedrich's painting called Wanderer by the Sea, Above the Sea Fog. And it's also called a Ruckenfurger in the sense, and this is a style of romanticism painting where the person is kind of smaller than the environment. But also by you seeing the back of the person, it's as if you're in the painting also looking out over the edge of the rocks from the little mountain there. It's kind of a beautiful painting. And that's what you want, to have a bird's eye view looking up from above so you can objectively perceive the situation and say, what's my best option? So here it is from a nutritional dietary point of view. Well, gee, all of these diseases are caused by a lack of fiber. So maybe if I just ate more fiber and avoided the things that cause leaky gut, I could potentially fix all these problems, certainly improve the situation. I'll do that. Gee, all these things over here are caused by high-fat diets and the caffeine and the lack of sleep and a couple of these toxins. I'll just avoid that, and I can make all these things improved. Oh, and also I need to get my vasodilators, which you get from meat and plant foods, potassium and the magnesium and the nitrate precursors. I'll just do that. So what I'm trying to say is with just fixing your diet, because it's the species-specific diet. If you talk to the zookeeper says, well, this animal eats this animal eats this, and they know. But you go to a doctor doesn't know what a human's supposed to eat. And I'll tell you something, dietitians don't know either. The dietitian schools are funded by these like fast food companies, and they'll say incredible amounts of totally ignorant, stupid stuff. You would be amazed how stupid a lot of the dietitian stuff they say. I just saw this short by a dietitian, and they're going, this is what I eat on an average day. All this meat and processed food and soy and all this other crap. I couldn't believe it. And that's what I'm trying to say is don't think they know. Their schools are sponsored by these food companies that tell them to sell stuff in a sense, and they don't even know it. So I tell you that because unless you understand what's going on, you have less chance. And there's also a few additional things affecting memory and cancer. You want to have an understanding of this so you got a better chance to stay healthy or to get better from whatever problems you have. So basically, the American diet's high fat, high sodium. They have really lousy outcomes. A lot of Americans are sort of burnt out, used up, not able to do much after about 55. I see that all day, every day. If you want to keep your brains, your physical fitness, your strength, your vitality, your energy, you got to improve your diet and avoid toxins. The Asians, the East Asians, Japan, Korea, China, often the rice-based diet, they're healthier because it's a low-fat diet, but nowadays they're eating more fried food, getting themselves into trouble. They often put tons of sodium, gets themselves into trouble. And then the Indian diet, South Asian diet, they often eat way too much fried food. Plus, they got the ghee and the yogurt. It's an animal dairy food. So they're not as healthy as they thought. When I was young, I thought all these Indians are so healthy. The vegetarian diet, they're skinny. They look pretty healthy when they're young. But they have these problems, and I think it's because quite often they eat too much fried foods, a lot of them. I know not all of them do, but a lot of them do. Here's a low-fat, low-sodium vegan. They have hardly any of these problems. That's what you want to do. That's the way to go. You eat starch, polymer glucose is what starch is, and it's wrapped in fiber. It takes time for the intestinal tract. It goes in your stomach because it's low caloric density. It stretches your stomach. You get early satisfaction of hunger. You feel good. Then it goes through your intestinal tract, and it takes time for the intestinal enzymes to peel the fiber off the glucose. And then the glucose is slowly absorbed into the blood, so you get a prolonged normal blood glucose level for the fewest number of calories eaten when you eat starch. And I can tell you, out of all my years, I've been a doctor over 30 years, the most important thing I ever learned about human health is that humans should eat more starch. That's it. That's the most important thing. And that's why I say that pre-med education in medical school is a joke. They can tell you, the 10th type of bacteria on a bug's butt, but they don't know what a human's supposed to eat. That's like the most important thing you can know. And that's why I laugh. A health coach in a week of serious study, a month of serious study, they'll know more than a doctor will with 12 years of education. You think I'm joking? I'm not. I talk to doctors and residents all the time, and I'll ask them questions. I'll say, well, what causes heart disease? And they don't really know. It sounds like a simple question. What causes autoimmune disease? They don't know the answers to any of the questions because I have a whole bunch of questions I've asked them. I find it kind of entertaining. And I often joke with them. I tell them, I can read your mind. You feel like you've been a good boy. You've worked really hard. But deep down, you feel like an imposter, a phony, don't you? And they go, well, yeah, kind of. And I'm like, because deep down, you know, despite all your work, and you did what you were supposed to do, you were good. You don't know what causes any of these diseases, and you don't really know how to treat them other than prescribe the recommended drug. But you're kind of wondering that it doesn't seem to work. So it's kind of funny, but it's true. That's how it is with all of them. Okay, and then, yeah, just briefly, this is sort of the Japanese type of atherosclerosis or Asian atherosclerosis, just because it's hypertension, basically, when they eat a low-fat diet. Look at intracranial atherosclerosis. Typical Western or American gets coronary artery disease. They'll also get some carotid disease, and they'll get pudendal artery, the Johnson, but coronary artery is the main thing. And if you also eat a lot of sodium in the Western diet, you'll get this other stuff, too. And just one quick thing about epidemiology. It's always the same. The plant-based community is always skinnier, healthier, less diabetes, less obesity, less hypertension. This is just one population, the Tarahumara in northern Mexico, the Pima. After the Mexican-American War in 1848, the Pima absorbed into Arizona. They ate the SAD diet. They're fat and sick off the charts. So Tarahumara, like it means like fleet of foot runner. They're running 100 miles in 2 days once a year at their big holiday. And they're like near the Sierra Madre Mountains, Copper Canyon. Sierra means like a saw because it goes up and down the tops of the mountains. Okay, so that's basically it, you know, and I got another picture of them that the Pimas end up with all this surgery. You know, here's the open heart surgery, the cabbage, right upper quadrant gallbladder surgery, right lower quadrant appendicitis, left lower quadrant sigmoid resection, amputation for diabetes. Well, meanwhile, the Tarahumara is running, you know, and in great shape. And so then, you know, it's funny, you know, some of these carnivore, low carb, paleo keto types are very rude with their comments on the internet. So one of them saw this slide and they go, oh, looks like your Tarahumara guy's wearing a diaper. Is he incontinent from eating a vegan diet? And I'm like, no, you ignoramus. That's just how they dress. Oh, and it's the same always. Any of these studies, people that eat in traditional plant-based diets, these are Yanomamo in like South America near the junction of Venezuela and Brazil in the Amazon jungle. They don't have any high blood pressure. They eat primarily a plant-based diet, no added sodium. They don't have any salt shakers out in the jungle. Okay? They don't ever get hypertensive. Whereas in the American population, they all do. And like I said, if you study these types of studies all over the world, populations that eat plant-based foods, they don't get any of this stuff. And that's anybody who studies it will come across it. It's obvious. The internet's almost like designed to confuse people because I had several friends tell me, we can't understand, figure out what to eat because there's so much contradictions. So that's why I say you look at epidemiology, it becomes pretty obvious. There's no such thing as a population that eats meat and oils and all this stuff and they're healthier than other people. Excuse me. This is called the Rosetto effect. This was in Rosetto, Pennsylvania, like in the 1950s and 60s. These family populations, a lot of these were Italian families where the parents, the children, the grandchildren, the grandfathers, they all lived in the same house or next to each other on the block. And they were incredibly healthy compared to demographically matched populations. So what's the point of this? It's called the Rosetto effect. Because the families were helping each other out, it reduced their stress levels and just made their lives a lot better. They were a lot healthier, despite they both smoked the same amount or drank the same amount. And like a typical way you can figure this out is imagine you're Luigi, okay, young Italian guy. I grew up around a bunch of Italians. I love Italians. They're really nice, friendly, good cooks, warm. Maybe I should have married an Italian girl. All right, so anyways, Luigi loses his job. And Luigi in Rosetto, he's like, I lost my job. They're like, it's okay, Luigi, you stay with us. And he stays with the family for a couple weeks, a couple months. He gets a new job, pays him back a little bit. Everything's fine. Okay, but now let's say Luigi moved away by himself to a faraway town. He loses his job. He's screwed. He can't pay his apartment bill. He can't buy for food. He's homeless. He's in the street and somebody beats him up in the street. Okay, it ain't good. So there's a big advantage to having an extended family and all working together and helping each other. And I actually think America is going back to that because everybody's so poor, they're going to have to stay together and help. The young ones can't move out, adult adolescents, okay? And they're all going to, but hopefully they'll help each other and they'll end up being better off in that way. But you know, as the economy gets worse, I think that's the way things are going. And by the way, all the Rosetto populations, you know, you hit the 1970s, the kids start moving away, far away for their jobs and whatnot. And then all their health goes into the garbage can, okay? They lost that benefit of an extended family. It's a good thing to have. And I think part of it, too, what I saw happen is, like in my own family, when I was a kid, None of the women, practically hardly any of them worked, or certainly hardly any of them worked full time. And I know that because we'd want to go to a friend's house. Okay. We could only go to a house or bring girlfriends over there if the parents were divorced, because then the mom had to work. So that's where you take your girlfriend and you have a little afternoon delight. Okay. And so what I'm saying is nowadays, most women work. There's tons of houses where there's no adult in the house in the afternoon, and the kids get themselves into more mischief. And what I'm trying to say is, when the woman's both have to work and the man has to work and the woman's exhausted, she comes home to the house. Men don't care about a house. He sort of figures it's my wife's house anyways. If we get divorced, she's keeping the place. And they don't really care about cleaning the house. So she's worked all day, and now she comes home. The house is a mess. She's got to clean up the house because she's the only one who cares about it. So then she's got double jobs. Now she's tired, and because she's tired, she's pissed off. She starts yapping at everybody. I come home, and what the F is this? How come you left us here? How come you didn't do the dishes? Blah, 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 blah. So everybody goes, uh-oh, she's home. They all go hide into their own rooms. So she's like, how come nobody wants to talk to me? So I think a lot, I know my mom was like the happiest person in the world, whereas I see all these middle-aged women, a lot of them are not too happy because they're overworked, they're exhausted. All right. So anyways, having an extended family is good for health. Here is a nice painting here. It's called Filial Piety. And here's an old guy who had some injuries. He's paraplegic. He can't move his legs too well. And what I'm saying is, this guy without his family, he'd be dead. They're helping take care of him and feed him and stuff. And, you know, you can extrapolate that to other situations. Having family support and friends and all this stuff, it really helps people to be healthy. We benefit from each other. All right. And it's sort of like Aristotle had said, the family is the invention of God to fulfill the needs of mankind. Yes, the family is very important. Also, we have something called biophilia. It makes us happy to see nice things in nature. So if you can maintain some nice nature, grow some plants in your room, whatever it is for you as an individual. This is one of my favorite landscape paintings. I actually think it's the best landscape painting of all time. It's called Among the Sierra Nevada Mountains by Albert Bierstadt, 1868. It's just beautiful. He's got a lot of the great paintings. This is incredibly, like, I think he's the best landscape artist ever. Thomas Cole was more of a landscape painter, but a storyteller painter. Okay, and you have to have a psychological mindset that helps you to be mentally strong. I like this quote by Marcus Aurelius. He's the old Stoic Roman emperor. He said, a man should be like a cliff, and all day long the rocks, the waves, you know, hit against the cliff, but the cliff is not moved. So basically where that comes from is, like I used to tag along with this emergency room doctor. He goes into one room, there's a big disaster. He just does what he can to solve the problem. Doesn't get emotionally affected at all. Goes in the next room, does the same thing. And I said, how could you not be emotionally affected? This is so sad what just happened, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, look, I can't get emotionally affected because if I did, I wouldn't be able to function and go in the next room. And all I'm saying is kind of having that attitude, it makes you more resilient. You still want to be nice and thoughtful, empathic and all that, but you still want to have a solid focus of who you are and what you're going to do. So like, for example, like when I was a young guy, if I was a doctor making rounds in the hospital and a clerk was really rude to me, I'd be like, that was so rude. I can't believe they behave that way. Or a resident from another service, a lot of really grouchy surgery residents because they're sleep deprived. Now I just say to myself, I don't internalize it. I don't say they were rude to me or I'm offended. I say to myself, hey, look, this person's sleep deprived. They can't control their behavior, or this person's an idiot. What I'm saying is I don't take it personally, and that's good. Because I can handle all kinds of nonsense and BS and things that would bother other people because I've developed this mindset. And what I'm saying is, in your own life, your own situation, that type of mindset enables you to get more work done and not be affected by negative stuff. A lot of people come to the conclusion happiness comes from a worthy purpose. Schopenhauer had said the best source of happiness comes from who a man is. A happy life is impossible. The highest a man can achieve is a heroic life. So basically you figure out what's the best I can do with my life? What should I be doing with my time? And if you do what you feel like you should be doing, then you're happy because you know you did the best you could. Ayn Rand had said art is a concretization of metaphysics. Okay, I don't want to get into all this philosophy right now. I don't think we got enough time. I know I'm kind of taking a lot of time here. Almost done though. All right, this is just, what is the credibility meter for improving health with religion? Oh, it makes people a lot healthier. You'd be surprised if you read the papers on it. And I've seen it in real life. Okay, so now what is the credibility for, I think this is for the vegan diet. In general, it's quite good, but there are some problems with it. There are a lot of high-fat vegan foods. There's a lot of junk food vegan foods. And then I think I made one step up. If you go organic, low fat, it has to be low fat. That's like probably the biggest step. There's still some potential problems, but it's much better. It's the most powerful thing in all healthcare and medicine. That's one of the reasons why I'm such a fan of it. Okay, because I'm real familiar with all the high tech stuff. Okay, I do a lot of the high tech stuff, and I can tell you the most powerful thing in all health is this low fat, low sodium vegan stuff. It just is, and the reason is that's how humans are designed. It's what we're made for. This is just showing the endothelium releases nitric oxide. It's a vasodilator, inhibits platelets from clotting, causes the vascular smooth muscle cells to relax. Well, I was going to previously get into all this flow stuff, but there's just not enough time to go into all my blood flow stuff. You eat the nitrates from plants. That's a vasodilator precursor. Okay. This is just showing another one of these things. You get your antioxidants from plants because they have to be able to use chemicals to prevent the sun from burning them up. An animal can just walk into the shade like a human. We don't got enough time to get into strokes, all this stuff. I'm going to skip all this stuff. I'm just going to skip all this stuff because it's too much. But I did want to show this slide. This is a slide of mitochondria inhibitors. So basically, I own about 7 biochemistry books. Okay, and I know I'd come across my readings in neurophysiology, cytotoxicity, problems with mitochondria inhibitors, same thing reading about diabetes. So I wanted to see, what did all my books have? So I own about 7 biochem books. So I go through all my biochemistry books, from college, from med school, and from personal interest, nutrition, biochemistry books. And there's nothing on mitochondria inhibitors. And I'm like, well, gee, I know they exist because I've come across them in my papers that I've been reading, but how come there's nothing in the books? So I go, I'm going to understand mitochondrial inhibition. So I start going through all the literature on mitochondria inhibitors. I'm like, holy crap. I very quickly found over 50 of them. And then you say, well, so what? They're probably a bunch of rare research things. No. They're common. Listen to these. Tell me if you ever heard of this stuff before. Statins. Statins for hyperlipidemia. Metformin for diabetes. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors for treatment of depression. Haldol for antipsychosis or schizophrenia. Mold inhibitors, fungal inhibitors, for processed foods so it doesn't grow mold in it, doesn't get returned to the company. They put them in there. These are all mitochondria inhibitors. You get what I'm saying? If you're hypoxic, just as little as 35% with the Warburg effect, you can potentially turn a cell into cancer. Well, guess what? You're getting the same effect with mitochondria inhibitors. So that even a lesser amount of hypoxia might induce cancer, immune cell dysfunction. These things are so common. Here's atrazine. That's what's sprayed on all your GMO corn. Here's GP sprayed on your GMO soy. Also on your non-organic beans. They'll spray that in oats if it's non-organic. PFOA, non-stick pans, cookware if you're frying food on non-stick cookware. F- in your unfiltered water. Hydroxynonenal if you're eating omega-6 oils. Tylenol, very common medicine. Common antibiotics, aminoglycosides, fluoroquinolones, beta-lactams, versions of penicillins. Okay, these are common things. Alcohol, arsenic, food dyes in all your processed food. You can see, and it goes on and on. There's other common ones too. So I'm just making the point. These things are really common. So what I would do is I want to optimize my health, my brain health, is I would avoid these things as much as I could. And that gets back to that live like Adam and Eve, kind of simple. When people meet me, like people who actually really know me, like the 2 things that kind of amaze them is how simple I am and also how much I read. Like the people who actually really know me, that's what they always say. So I told you, one of my kids said to me, he goes, Dad, he said, why are you so happy? He said, you have the worst life out of everybody in the whole family. You have the worst life. Your life sucks, but you're the happiest one. Why? And it's because I know who I am and I do what I know I should be doing. That makes me happy. I have a strong sense of self. Okay, so that's why you want to figure out what should I be on. This is just my theory of dementia. And in the bottom line, I kind of recommend, I call it the Spartan vegan diet, which is really just a version of the low-fat vegan diet. So, satisfy your hunger, especially with starches. I also eat a lot of fruits. I think fruits are actually much better than people realize. And then I'll eat some veggies for some greens, some nitrates. And the only thing I take is vitamin B12. And I try to keep these things good, get my sleep, get my sunshine. I don't drink any caffeine. I am religious. I think religion improves life. And it's been a very good thing for me and for many others. My exercise, I try to maintain good relationships. That's basically it. It's working out pretty well. And I've seen that work well for other population. And the literature, scientific literature supports that. So that's basically it.
Well, thank you so much for that. Wow. You just gave a wonderful lecture and we really enjoyed it tremendously. Green Warriors, please click like to show your appreciation for what Dr. Rogers just had shared with us today. And now we're going to take your questions. And there have been a lot of questions coming in. So we'll see how much time we have to take them all in. Boomer and Beyond Wellness said, that was awesome, all caps. Yes, I agree. That was wonderful. Yes. And she said, thank you. And I think that represents a lot of the comments that have been coming in. So let's see. Okay. So Anne wants to know, for nutrition absorption, should chia seeds be grounded?
You could do, I'm not a big fan of chia seeds or flax seeds or any of that stuff. And where does that come from? There's this whole different schools of thought on omega-3s. Okay. I personally think you get enough omega-3s. I studied it in some detail. You get enough omega-3s from just eating plant foods. I don't think you need to be chasing chia seeds or flaxseed. I know a lot of people do, but I don't think so. What I worry about is you're talking about PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids. When you eat them in a plant, they're like perfectly packaged. The more you start eating them in a processed form, the more they're going to be prone to lipid peroxidation, meaning upon exposure to oxygen, PUFA fats, they always got a methylene bridge carbon in between the double bonds, and it's easy for oxygen to sort of pluck off that hydrogen, bind to it, and then it can undergo like a chain reaction, a lipid peroxidation, like dominoes falling. And so what I'm trying to say is, to me, it seems like you're more likely to have a problem than a benefit. So I'm not a fan of all that stuff. Plus, I think people have a tendency to overdose themselves with omega-3s. We don't need that many. We get enough from the plant foods. You can still remember childhood experiences because your neurons are intact. They're still present. They don't turn over. They don't turn over like, the cells in your gut. So you don't need that much omega-3. So that's my feeling on it. So I just don't mess with that stuff. I mean, look at like omega-3 fish oil. It'll come in an opaque bottle because oxygen and light hitting it, it'll oxidize, go rancid really fast. Then you got to store it in the fridge. So what do you think is going to happen as soon as you put it in your mouth, 98.6 degrees temperature? I just think it's an overrated thing. I think it's good to minimize your fat. When I look at all the research study, any fat you eat makes you more likely to be obese, makes you more likely to be diabetic, makes you more likely to end up with a long-term consequence of it having your blood a little more thrombotic. I realize in the short term, omega-3s can, decrease triglycerides and have a slight antithrombotic effect, but I think long-term, they predispose to obesity. I don't think they're a good idea. That's my personal take on it.
Yeah, and I often wonder because, well, first of all, obviously the ground chia or flax that you buy in the store have been sitting there, not in their state that they originally nature intended for them. So right there, they could be going rancid. Plus, they're being transported in trucks that aren't refrigerated, and they're sitting on a shelf for how long, and that's not refrigerated. So I often wonder about the nuts and the seeds and the rancidity. So that's a very good point. Okay, so here Angela says, what is Dr. Rogers' stance on lasting emotional trauma effects on health? On the flip side, what does emotional resilience and good attitude humor have on health?
Well, I think
Oh, 90s drinking and sad diet, 90-year-old.
there's some people that can live to 95. They sort of get lucky despite, smoking and drinking. I remember George Byrne, the actor, the comedian, he said, if I knew I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. And it's, yes, some people sort of escape it. It's kind of like, you can have a whole bunch of people in a very dangerous situation, a bunch of planes flying overhead and there's anti-aircraft flak guns and one of them survives, okay? Well, they got lucky, okay? So it does sometimes happen, but the smart move is you'll have much better odds if you just live, eat healthy and avoid things like alcohol and tobacco. But in terms of like psychological, the things I alluded to are what I believe is you sort of ask yourself, like I'll just give you like my own situation. Well, I'll tell you my situation when I was in college. I had injured myself as an athlete, so I get a scholarship to Stanford because they wanted to build up their wrestling team, but it was very far away from where I grew up. So I go there and I'm totally lonely. I don't know anybody. I hated it. I was so lonely. It was painful how lonely I was. I had left behind a girl that I was in love with, and I was kind of like, what the heck am I doing here? I got re-injured, so the coach didn't like me. He wanted to take my scholarship away from me. My girlfriend calls me up and says, she wondered if it would be okay for her to go to homecoming with some other guy. And I'm like, God, does my life suck? And I was having a hard time in school. So, I talked to my mother on the phone. I was real close to my mom more than anyone else. My mother said to me, she goes, Peter, God doesn't want you to be a wrestler. God wants you to be a scholar. You are either going to become maybe a great scientist or a great doctor. And I'm like, you know what, Mom, I got to do something. You know what? That sounds like a good idea. I'm just going to try to become a great scientist or a great doctor and hope for the best. And secretly in my own mind, I kind of hope that if I become a great doctor or scientist, that my life will get good again, because my life really sucked. There were no parties. It's like the nickname of Stanford is the barn. It's like in the middle of a field, a farm, okay? There is nothing to do. There's no bars. There's no social events. There's no parties. There's the ugliest women in the world. I was there for 4 years. I never once had a girlfriend. My girlfriend broke up with me. I was the loneliest, most miserable, sad guy you can imagine. I was a pretty good athlete, too. I was captain of the team. I set an all-time school record, student athlete of the year at Stanford. It was just, I never had a girlfriend there. That's how bad it was. And the reason I tell you that is that idea that someday I'm going to do something special as a scientist or doctor, it drove me. I would get out of my chair and I'd study all day long. And then I would also train for my sport. And the fact that I had this hope, I had a purpose, it didn't matter how lonely or miserable or bad it was. I just pushed myself. And so what I'm trying to say is that enabled me to get through it. And I think whatever you are in life, you sort of say to yourself, okay, well, I'm half screwed. You know, I miss the woman I love and my social relationships are going to crap. The coach hates me, but at least I've got this. And that enabled me to kind of endure, because I was ready to drop out of school and come back home. And my mom told me not to. One of the assistant coaches liked me. What I'm trying to say is, if you find the silver lining, you know, the light in the darkness, whatever, it can strengthen you to just hang on to that and pursue that. And like I said, I say to myself quite often, at least I'm half screwed, but at least I'm not totally screwed. Like a lot of people end up being totally screwed. So I don't know. That gives me the energy to do a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I often think about, especially when you see people in their 90s today, they lived through the Depression. So first of all, they went through a lot of food scarcity, most of them. And their portion sizes for meat were not the same as what they are now, because even the animals, the farm animals, weren't as big. And processed foods in the earlier parts of their lives, there wasn't much of processed foods. So going through all those, and they ate all organic food. So they had a lot of good things happening to them in as far as health goes in their early lives. And whereas people today, we're starting off at a deficit because of the standard American diet and what it is today. And George Burns did have heart surgery. So I'm trying to remember what it was, but he may have had a stent or something. So he wasn't totally immune to illness. Thanks for bringing up that question, Angela. That was very interesting. Okay, Boomer and Beyond Wellness. What is Dr. Rogers' take on vegans having more osteoporosis? I wonder if it has to do with being vegan versus whole food plant-based.
Yeah, I don't think they really have more osteoporosis. It's the meat eaters who especially get osteoporosis, because they have more of the amino acid composition of meat is different than in plant food. They've got more sulfur-containing amino acids like methionine and cysteine, and in their metabolism, they're often degraded into sulfuric acid, causing a low-grade metabolic acidosis. And so that will lead to leaching of calcium from the bones and from cells. And what happens is when the kidney excretes the protons, the acid, it simultaneously excretes calcium. So you're basically peeing your bones into the toilet to some extent, and you're also increasing your risk of kidney stones. And another thing, too, is you could look at the Bantu women of South Africa, and they were sort of interesting. They would have typically about 10 children. They would nurse each baby from anywhere, typically about 3 or 4 years. They'd nurse each child. And as soon as they're done nursing, they're pregnant again, having another baby. And the point is they would eat very small amounts of calcium, and they were eating the plant foods. They didn't get any osteoporosis. They're pretty active, walking around, carrying their kid around. So I don't think that's the case. I mean, we can get into all the studies, and you got to watch out, too. There's a lot of distorted studies, industry funded, because it was rather embarrassing for dairy to see that it was actually causing osteoporosis rather than improving bone growth, because that used to be a big selling point for dairy. Get all our calcium, have stronger bones, but it turned out to not be the case. So I don't think that's correct.
Yeah, we do have to be wary of the different research that they're, or so-called research that they're putting out there. Walk away, Renee. ANA positive rheumatologist tells me I have the markers of Sojourn's, maybe fibromyalgia. I went junk food vegan first, but now am eating whole food plant-based strictly. Is it too late to heal from this with this diet?
Well, the body always tries to heal and make things better, and you got to play from where you're at. So I would certainly give it a try. There's a couple different theories about fibromyalgia. One of them is that it can be related to obesity, and obesity can have the stomach pushing on the inferior vena cava, which transmits pressure through the right atrium, transmits pressure through the superior vena cava, and that transmits pressure into the brain. And you can get a venous intracranial hypertension with a spinal venous hypertension. And so basically when a person loses weight, that decreases, okay? A lot of nerve pain can be ischemic due to a lack of oxygen and glucose delivery in the neuron, also lack of ATP production, energy production by the neuron. So when you minimize the dietary fat, you get increased oxygen delivery to the tissues. That can improve things. You minimize dietary sodium, you get less vasoconstriction. That can improve things. So you get better oxygen delivery to the tissues. You avoid the mitochondria inhibitors, then the cells can make more ATP, more energy, and then they can function more effectively, and they're less likely to be in pain. Okay, so those are all things you could do pretty easily. You eat enough fiber so you don't get leaky gut, so you don't get any type of recurrent, autoantibodies, and that can cause dramatic improvements in autoimmune disease. So that's what I would do. If I had a potential autoimmune disease, I would avoid, and you do here if you're talking about Sjogren's, I would avoid all those things that cause leaky gut, and I would eat my dietary fiber, and I would optimize my oxygen and glucose delivery to my cells, and I would avoid the things that cause leaky gut. I would avoid the mitochondria inhibitors. There's a whole bunch of things you can do, and I would do all that stuff. Because the one thing I see is people tend to want one thing. People want 1 + 1 = 2. So just give me the pill and I get better. Thank you. That's what they want. But that doesn't exist. There's no quick fix. And what I'm trying to say, what I've seen in life is quite often there's 20 things that the person is doing wrong that they could fix. And they have to make the effort to fix them. And it'll take a little while to see the benefit. And you might only get 1% benefit from this, 2% from this. But you add that all up, all of a sudden that's 30% benefit. That's a big benefit. So you kind of got to be willing to play the game and do all that. And I think you'd be surprised how good a benefit you can have. I learned that from my wrestling coach. I had a wrestling coach, Dave Schultz, world and Olympic champion. And we go to meet him in the beginning of training at school. And the guy's fat. We go to the weight room to lift. He's weak. We run sprints on the hills and he's slow. And I'm like, how did this guy, he's fat, weak, and slow, become a national champion? And the reason was he was so obsessive about learning everything about technique that it's like he could read your mind when you wrestle him and then just anticipate what you do. And what I'm trying to say is that's how you get better from these problems. I call it incrementalism. A whole bunch of small things, each one beneficial, but small in and of itself. But together in aggregate, they make a big benefit. And I think that's the smart way to do things. I've seen that to be a winning strategy for a lot of things in life, including health.
Well, thank you for that. And that is one reason why I love having you on this broadcast, because I'm all about the whole food, plant-based lifestyle, and I think it is beneficial. But there are so many other elements that not everybody is talking about. They talk about pillars of health with sleep and exercise, but you go in even deeper than that. And I have a playlist with Dr. Rogers, lots of his different lectures that talk about the different things that he just mentioned, the different aspects that you really need to pay closer attention to, because you talk about the toxins and not many people are talking about that. So there's a lot to know. And I really appreciate you bringing that up. Well, I think that's, let me just see. I think we might have one more question. Okay. Oh, well, Walkaway Renee said, thank you, Dr. Rogers. Has the best word picture type illustrations. It makes his subjects easier to understand. Oh, that's very nice. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And all right, let me just see. Okay.
Yeah, I also put a little more text into my slides that I don't read because I sort of figure for the people who are extra, because I know my lecture kind of goes on long, but so for the people who are extra interested, they go back and look at those slides. I think they'll find there's more information there. And so I think there's good reason to be hopeful. And I think there's good reason to believe a lot of progress is possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, everybody, please click like for what Dr. Rogers presented us today. It was just wonderful. And I really want to thank you, Dr. Rogers, for sharing your fascinating insights and your practical tips on how we can all stay youthful and healthy longer. And the Green Warriors and I really appreciate your knowledge about and your commitment to promoting health and wellness through clean, plant-powered eating. And why don't you give us a final take-home message for my Green Warriors? What is that?
Well, yeah, so basically you avoid the high fat, the high sodium, you eat the plant-based diets, you get optimal blood flow. And then every cell needs energy, and you get that from your mitochondria. So avoid all those mitochondria inhibitors. And then you need the gut to function well so you don't clot things off. That's also part of blood flow. You just do those things, and you could dramatically improve your health. It's the difference between being energetic and vigorous and with it versus being fat, sick, and stupid, So it's worth it. Doesn't cost you any money. I call it God's way of healing. It's free. Why not do it rather than go to man's way of healing? Expensive bills, all these pills, takes all your money, then you're broke and you're sick and you die early. I mean, what good is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Green Warrior, tell us, what are you going to remember? What's your takeaway from today? We have a lot of information that was presented to us today, but maybe something rang true in your mind today. I also wanted to thank Jess Tass Voice. She did the promo. She did the countdown. She helped so much in getting the word out about this broadcast so that other people can find their way here and learn about nutrition and health. And Just Has Voice, tell us who is coming up next.
Want to know the secret to weight loss? Stay tuned as we uncover how intermittent fasting and a plant-based lifestyle can transform your body and help you achieve lasting results. Join Amy and Sia Hurst on Wednesday, July 3rd, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, on Be Green with Amy Live.
I want to thank you, Green Warrior, for joining us today. Your engagement and your support make these discussions meaningful and impactful. And I really hope that you're feeling inspired to take a closer look at your food choices and your exposure to toxins and your mindfulness and make some positive changes for your health and well-being. Because remember, every bite that we take is an opportunity to nourish our bodies and become the healthiest versions of ourselves. So please stay tuned for more empowering content and subscribe to my channel and to Dr. Rogers' channel and share our message with others who can benefit, because together as Green Warriors, we can make a meaningful difference in the world. And I wanted to also ask Dr. Rogers to tell us about yourself and where we can find you.
Oh, I have a YouTube channel, Peter Rogers MD. I've also written a bunch of books that are available at Amazon.com. And yeah, you're welcome to check those out.
Okay. Yes, you have written many books on many subjects, and I'll have links to that in the description as well if people are interested in that, because there's quite a bit of information that we wouldn't suspect that you would be writing about, and very interesting topics, in fact. But I want to give a special thank you to the Green Warriors, because I want to offer you 5 free recipes. And all you have to do is go to begreenwithamy.com/join, and I'll send them to you. And if you want to go ahead and join me and Dr. Rogers with my tagline, you can type it in the comments if you like, and Dr. Rogers is going to help me now. Dr. Rogers, are you ready?
Yep.
Okay. Well, until I see all of you again, remember, be strong, be well, and be
green.
green. Thank you so much, Dr. Rogers. Thank you, Green Warriors. I hope you'll join us again soon.
Now you can get 5 free whole food plant-based SOS-free recipes from Be Green with Amy. Just click on the link in the show notes and Amy will send you 5 free recipes, motivational quotes, and more so you can be strong, be well, and be green.